The sun bleeds. The ultimate genesis of life has been soaked in the crimson sins of man. The precious soil refuses to surrender her bounty of food and transforms to sand, silt, and dust. The seas have shrunk to nothingness, and rivers are barely a trickle. This is the world of Athas, the world of the dark sun. But Athas was not always like this. Long ago, in lifetimes unremembered.
Another world, another time, in the Age of Wonder. 1,000 years ago, this land was green and good.
The world of Athas was once blue and beautiful. The sun was a brilliant sapphire orb, shining over boundless cerulean seas. The Halflings were the only intelligent race at that time. Diminutive in stature but expansive of mind, the Halflings built an advanced civilization that stretched across the many thousands of islands in the world-spanning Athasian Sea. Though ignorant of true magic, the brilliant Halfling savants were able to devise a way of controlling the energy of nature. By sacrificing the life of plants, they were able to shape the world to their whim. Much of the records of this time have been lost, but all agree it was a paradise and a time of wonders. Mighty cities built of ever-living plants, surrounded by great oceans teeming with life. War and hardship were unknown.
The race of mystics came to live in a dream of peace. Their ways were the gentle ways of natural wizards.
The Halfling capital was Tiragi, a beautiful vine-draped city in a verdant mossy marsh. All of the brilliant colors of nature were expertly placed upon countless buildings grown from trees rather than built. Instead of streets, Tiragi was crisscrossed with hundreds of shallow canals. All was joy, perfection and harmony made glorious by the Halfling nature lords. For untold generations, the Halflings were the undisputed rulers of a world civilization based on the majestic union of nature. Until the world changed. The meddling Halflings were never satisfied with their bounty, and attempted to shift the balance. Renegade savants forgot the ancient laws of working with nature, and instead they found a way to force the earth to bow to their will. With this newfound might, the Halflings thought they could double their food extracted from the oceans. Alas, these experiments created a mighty poison. Their gluttonous desire for more power and food caused a brownish tide of algae that spread inexorably into all of the waters of Athas. Countless thousands of creatures went extinct. Oceanic plant life died off almost entirely, and the Halflings too would have starved to death or been choked with disease had they not taken drastic measures. The nature lords understood the only way to stop the cancer from eating all of Athas's life would be to use their precious sun. Most of the Halflings who had not already perished from starvation retreated to a mighty stronghold known as the Pristine Tower. With a supreme effort of sacrifice, the Halflings used the might of the sun to destroy the algae and destroyed their civilization in the process. The brown tide was eradicated, the seas were drained, and true continents took the place of the tiny archipelagos of the Halflings. Mountains rose from the receding oceans, forests grew, and huge grasslands stretched across the horizon. A new green age began, named for the abundance of trees, grass, and plants on the new continents, fed by the life of the newly yellow sun. The final act of the nature lords was to transform most of their race into new life forms, that they may better survive in the new world. The little folk were transfigured into dwarves, elves, humans, trolls, orcs, ogres, and all the other sentient races, common to worlds such as Greyhawk and Faerun. A few Halflings remained, but withdrew into scattered settlements far in the wilds. Kingdoms were built, continents settled, and the world was farmed, hunted, and mined by the new races. All could have been as it is on 1,000 other prime-material worlds, if it wasn't for Rajat and his crusade. At the dawn of the Green Age, one race stood above all the others, the Thri-Kreen. They were a mixture of all the other races, in appearance, and not to be found on any other world but Athas. The hybrid Thri-Kreen in many ways represented the wisdom and benevolence of the ancient Halflings. They lived a solitary life far away from the younger folk, seeking to guide and help them whenever possible. Perhaps they were the primordial nature lords transformed into a new visage so they could ensure the success of their grand design. Tragically, one of these great watchers turned his formidable intellect to violence and cruelty. His name was Rajat, the first mortal to develop sorcery on Athas. Deep in the primeval forests, hidden from his fellows, Rajat learned to shape and bend the world to his whims, without the gentle touch of natural law. As Rajat was the sole possessor and originator of magical power on Athas, all those ignorant of spellweaving found him unstoppable. Originally, Rajat was a gentle soul seeking to love and help those around him. He wandered Athas, bringing peace where there was war, and plenty to the starving. Rajat's limbs were weak, but his mind was supremely powerful. His powers of the brain, called Psionics, was as mighty as he was hideous. The other Pyrene were a race of transcendent beauty, near immortality and great wisdom and virtue. Yet Rajat was a cursed thing compared to his kin. His face and body were crippled and deformed. Thus too his soul became as disfigured as his body. As he sank into despair, Rajat became weary of the never-ending violence and stupidity he felt afflicted the new races of Athas. He began to feel that nothing he did could ever really bring any change, and those he tried to help perhaps did not deserve it. After centuries of self-hatred, Rajat poured his bitterness and rage outward. Rajat looked upon the Green Age with nothing but disgust. He saw the humans and demi-humans as no better than beasts, that bred prodigiously and swarmed across the world. The presence of these creatures was a crime of usurpation to Rajat. The world belonged to the Halflings, and it was lost, he felt, through no true fault of their own. Using his mighty magical forces and his inherent immortality, Rajat set about creating his dreadful vision for Athas. The entire planet must be purged of all sentient life forms, created in the Green Age, so that the planet may be returned to its original masters, the Halflings. Rajat discovered the abandoned pristine tower of the Nature Masters, and through it learned to harness the power of the sun just as they did. He wrought devastating ecological change to Athas. As his powers swelled, the sun began to die, and with it all the vegetation and water. Around him, the renegade sorcerer gathered 15 mighty champions. The greatest warriors and generals of his age were sought and trained in the new arts of magic. Rajat chose only humans for his champions, and only mighty psionicists. With magic tied to the way of the mind, these champions were nigh invincible in combat. To these pawns, Rajat lied about his crusade. He claimed the ceaseless war was meant to destroy all of the threats to humankind, leaving the world finally safe for humanity. Many of his followers perceived that Rajat was perhaps insane and certainly evil. Yet whatever their reservations, his champions lusted for power and glory, and agreed to wage his diabolical war. The wars of extermination continued for the rest of the Green Age, growing more and more terrible each year. It was no force of barbaric orcs or hell-spawned demons that ruined Athas. It was humanity. Bent to the will of one sorcerer, the 15 champions led the forces of mankind into the forests to eradicate the Elves, deep into the mountains to destroy the Dwarves, across the plains and deserts to purge the lizard folk and erase the gnomes. The champions earned fearsome cognomens such as Lizardman Executioner and Butcher of Dwarves. All through the green earth, the champions led their unstoppable armies in a time of sorrow for all life, burning, crushing, and eventually exterminating every race they encountered, man, woman, and child. The verdant lands of Athas burned, the earth was salted to prevent any resowing of the soil. As the wrath of humanity fell upon the land, the great forests began to wither and die. It was during this age that the yellow sun began to darken and stain red. The orb itself seemed to reflect the bloody swathe of terror cutting into the planet. The reddish energies of the dying stars seemed to boil away the once great oceans of Athas. All around Rajat and his crusaders, nature was crippled and dying. Some of the races on Athas were totally, utterly wiped out in the Blood Purge. Lizardmen, pixies, and gnomes, among others, have been totally erased from the planet. Many others would have been lost too, had Rajat's champions not turned on him at the very end. Rajat's fellow Pyrene stood aghast at his sudden malevolence. The few of his kindly race that were left began to work against their fallen kin. For every patch of land he mutilated, they attempted to restore with preservation magic, but it was to no avail. The might of Rajat and his warlords was too strong. They unscrupulously tore into the energy of the land itself to drain life from the sun and the earth to reach almost godlike status. All of the great nations of all races began to fall. Even the human kingdoms that turned against him were crushed just as ruthlessly. The population dwindled. Years of pillage turned into decades of slaughter and then centuries of eradication. The champions, possessed of unnaturally long life through vile magics, one day returned to Rajat as he sat atop the crystal tower. Rajat saw his generals arrayed before him and raced forward, eyes glinting with madness. "Has it been done?" he asked. "Have the abominations been eradicated? Can the Blue Age start anew?" His champions, grave of face and aspect, shook their heads. "Then why have you returned?" spat Rajat angrily. "For your life," they answered, and drew their weapons. Whether they were all wicked at the beginning of their dark quest, the champions had become irrevocably evil after centuries of murder. Their lust for power drove them ever forward on his plans to conquer the world. Only now, at the very end, after so much suffering and atrocity, did the champions perceive that the final plan was not to give the world to humans, but to restore it to the Halflings. Only then did Rajat's mighty warlords turn against him. Rajat was aged, but he yet possessed fearsome powers of the mind. His wrath was brutal, but he had trained his disciples far too well. Boris of Ebb, the Butcher of Dwarves, personally led the assault on Rajat the Warbringer. After slaying Rajat's halfling guards, his champions used a mighty artifact, the Dark Lens, to imprison Rajat in the shadow realm known as the Hollow, a place of void and blackness from which he could never escape. Rajat was yet too powerful to slay, however, and he waits there still, fallen into total insanity, driven only by thoughts of revenge against his underlings, and desire to complete his purging of the world. Boris, the Dwarf Butcher, now the master of the champions, showed his dark brethren how to ascend to the next stage of existence. Through the baleful energies of the Dark Lens, he transformed them into half-human, half-dragons. Their bodies twisted and mutated into a transcendent form of towering humanoid draconids. To these newly ascended heroes, Boris bestowed the title of Sorcerer-King. The fell magic of the transfiguration opened a conduit to the elemental planes. Boris showed the newly enthroned monarchs how to channel energy from the inner planes and bestow it onto their mortal followers, in a twisted perversion of the divine magic that true gods gave to their worshippers. The Sorcerer-Kings thus came to possess the might of gods, with fanatical clerics worshipping them. These priests would become brutal enforcers of the Sorcerer-King's will, the mighty Templars. Boris assigned to each of the deific Sorcerer-Kings a city to rule in the Tyr region, the only section of Athas known to have any fragment of civilization survive the cleansing wars. Boris, mightiest and bloodiest of the champions, set the world into its present state of tyranny and slavery. From deep within the Hollow, Rajat still battered and raged against his prison of eternal nothingness and torment. In order to keep Athas eternally safe from the first wizard, Boris declared that he must transform himself into a creature of unimaginable power, a full dragon, the first ever known on Athas. Bathed in the energies of the Dark Lens, Boris completed his ascent into a dragon of truly godlike power, far stronger than any dragon known on any other prime material world. The dragon, once called Boris, raged across the deserts for thousands of years until the present day. Each year he must devour 1,000 human sacrifices from the Sorcerer-Kings to maintain the magical wards of Rajat's prison. His immortality and ceaseless struggle against Rajat have slowly turned him completely insane. The Wars of Cleansing and the Green Age came to an end. The Wars of Cleansing began with massacre. climaxed with betrayal, and ended with slavery and tyranny. The Age of the Sorcerer-Kings had begun. When the Crimson Dawn fell upon Athas, a new era began. The planet had once again been rocked by devastating forces, bent on parasitizing life to power their dark whims. The oceans all but disappeared, leaving empty pits of sand and dust. The old continents, once teeming with vegetation and animal life, have been reduced to vast deserts. Mile upon mile upon mile of sand, dust, silt, and salt, from horizon to horizon. The world of Athas is now a wretched wasteland. The desert comes in many shapes and types. Much of the lands of the Sorcerer-Kings are sand without any visible topsoil. Fierce winds push the sand into giant dunes, 100 meters or more in height. Traversing the sand dunes is easy enough if you have enough water, but if a storm blows up, all of that fire-hot particulate matter will be blown directly into your face. Some desert walkers have had all of their skin flayed by a sudden gust. There are few landmarks in the deep sandy wastes, and even experienced wanderers can find themselves off course and swallowed up by the endless dunes. The daylight hours are dominated by furnace-like heat. By early morning, the temperature has already climbed to wearying levels. At midday, all but the hardiest of creatures retreat against the sun's punishing rays. Even for those with the toughest constitutions, the temperature is oppressive at best and murderous at worst. Heatstroke can fell even a strong man with a belly full of water. Someone that has already been weakened by thirst, hunger, or injury may faint and never wake up. The heat is a constant reminder of the fragility of morality. Surviving alone is virtually impossible, and a well-trained, coordinated party is necessary to make it through the desert. But if you go without water for long enough, your body's biological drives begin to take over. Soon your only thoughts are of slaking your thirst. Everything else is a distraction that can and will be eliminated to take the burning, dusty dryness from your throat. Every day you are without proper hydration, you must make a wisdom check. If you fail, your alignment is temporarily changed to chaotic evil. Until your thirst is quenched, you will do anything, including murdering your friends, in order to remove the maddening need for a drink. One of the most treacherous desert types is the dust sink. Silt is a fine, thin layer of dust, somewhere between the consistency of clay and sand. The silt is not strong enough to support a man's weight, and you'll slowly sink into it if you try and cross. The largest deposit of the dusty material is the Silt Sea. The sea was once the bed of an ancient ocean, now long evaporated. On clear days, the silt looks like a glassy, still film of salt or ice. Most of the time, the silt is stirred up by enormous dust storms. Visibility is reduced to almost nothing even at midday. Navigating outside of well-traveled routes even on a clear day is almost always fatal. Traversing the sea is easy enough if you have the ability to fly or levitate, as long as you weren't attacked by the many pterodactyls soaring over the silt looking for food. Those without magical means need to employ one of the great silt skimmers. These are ships that sail of a sort, partially through wind power, and partially through slave-driven wheels that grind through the muck. A constant hazard for anyone crossing the sea are mighty giants. These colossal 18-foot humanoids can comfortably wade waist-deep through the shallow regions of the coast. Lucky ships are merely robbed of their cargo and sent on their way. Unlucky ships are treated as passing food carts, with delicious meats aboard. The giants live on virtually unassailable islands, far out from the shoreline. Anyone that passes too close to their homes are pelted with boulders until they leave or sink. No one has ever traversed the entire sea all the way east. As far as most Athasians are concerned, the sea marks the edge of the world. Treacherous predators lurk beneath the dust, ready to swallow anyone who stumbles in. The most disturbing is a gargantuan carnivore called the Silt Horror. Most of the creature's bulk is concealed below the silt. Its body, such as it is, resembles a titanic amoeba or brain with a giant fang-lined mouth. The horror snags its prey by extending muscular tentacles over the silt line and dragging down anything it can catch. Killing a silt horror is a Herculean task that only the most foolhardy would ever attempt. Snaking off from the silt sea are mighty river channels filled with dust. These silt rivers are known as the estuary of the Forked Tongue because they diverge into two paths north and south that looks like a snake's tongue. The rivers form a great trade route connecting multiple city-states. All along the shorelines are dozens of small villages, nomad encampments, and bandit bolt holes. They're all looking to make a profit on the silt skimmers through fair means or foul, though even the fairest villager charges a criminally high price for vital supplies to silt caravans in need. The rivers are typically faster and less onerous than crossing the burning sands, but scarcely less dangerous. Pirates patrol the riverbeds looking for easy marks or stray travelers, along with more giants from the Silt Sea looking to charge extortionate tolls for passage. The most verdant parts of Athas are the rolling grasslands. These comparatively lush regions serve as food for herd animals. The tough grass, thorny bushes, and stunted trees are constantly under threat of destruction by overzealous foragers. To prevent the loss of yet more plant life, militant druids will defend certain patches of savanna with murderous force against any passers-by. Travel through the scrublands would be easy except the rich pickings of food and forage attract hungry wildlife and bandits. Salt flats are deserts crusted over with a hard layer of glistening white saline. Traveling through the flats is simple enough, though it lacks almost any plant life or water, even underground. Reaching the soil beneath thousands of years of accumulated salt deposits is accomplished by slaves, brutally hacking into the ground with picks and shovels. The work is almost always fatal, and more slave revolts have begun in the salt fields than anywhere else on Athas. The Ringing Mountains split the eastern tier lands from the plains to the west. The mountains are extremely steep and almost impossible to scale without magical means. The tallest peaks reach 2 vertical miles and have a thin layer of snow at the very top. Abutting the Ringing Mountains are the rocky Badlands. The ground is crisscrossed with deep ravines with vertical slopes to the bottom. Clambering over the razor bush-choked canyons and ridges is extremely challenging, and likely to ruin any clothing and footwear you possess. One last barrier to the mountains are the stony fields. Relatively flat compared to the labyrinth of the Badlands, the stony fields are littered with sharp stones. Even tough boots or sandals may be pierced and ruined by the broken ground. Water, the foundation of all life, has almost vanished from the surface of Athas. A few tiny pools still provide a haven for meager stands of stunted trees and bushes. One such is the Silver Spring Oasis, guarded by a tribe of elves. It costs 2 silver pieces to enter and avail yourself of foul-tasting brackish water. Any open water source is fanatically guarded unto death by its owners. Such is the wealth and security the water provides that vicious struggles for supremacy are fought between rival merchant houses and city-states for access. Oases form a string of lifelines in the desert, and knowledge of their location is a valuable asset. Unscrupulous merchants are occasionally paid off by bandit gangs to give false directions to gullible city dwellers. Thinking they are going to find a soothing pool of water, the adventurers are met by a swarm of cutthroats, ready to relieve them of their valuables and sell them into slavery. The majority of water is buried deep underground in aquifers. Access to wells that draw up this water is heavily militarized by whatever group claims dominance over that area, usually a city-state's Templar guards. In a few select areas, water drifts upward from the aquifers and creates miles of mud flats. Most swiftly dry out in the heat, leaving a runny, clay-like surface that may crash downwards if you try to stand on it. Other mud fields are kept carefully hydrated by druids or elemental guardians. The muck underfoot makes traveling arduous. All of the water is drained upward into the soil, leaving very little in the water table to obtain from wells. The only natural resource is wild animals foraging on the stunted bushes usually found in the mudflat areas. Whatever part of the vast and diverse Athasian desert you find yourself in, there is one constant: struggle. All of these areas are united in a grim hostility to life of any kind. The titanic overconsumption of a few has left 1,000 lifetimes of hardship for everyone else in the resulting desolation. One of the best parts of an Athasian adventure is incorporating that oft-neglected element of a campaign: survival. Half of any adventure is just finding a way to cross hostile terrain alive. Exploring a dungeon or two at the end is vital, of course, but a DM should never overlook how much of a trial just reaching your destination alive can be. Too often RPGs, especially of the computer variety, overlook the logistics struggle in favor of character interaction, plot, and dialogue, but it's a fatal mistake to create a world that is riddled with that falseness. Without a keen understanding and participation in the ecology and economy of a world through eating, sleeping, drinking, and adapting to weather, you're really only playing half of a game. The Dark Sun is a perfect chance to introduce players to the painful vagaries of proper clothing, footwear, pack animals, food supplies, water dowsing, and all the other techniques required for survival in the scorching Athasian sands. Ultimately, any story about Athas is going to have to intersect with the environment. It's a setting about a world that suffered a long execution at the hands of men willing to commit omnicide, the obliteration of all life just for their own insatiable lust for power. Your characters, by necessity, are going to have to learn to control their own desires and find a proper balance in life in order to survive. Catastrophic damage to nature has sent countless species on Athas to extinction since the end of the Green Age. The grim struggle for food and water on the barren plains has evolved a set of hardy creatures fully adapted to desert living. Reptilian and insectoid life tend to predominate over more familiar mammalian creatures, perhaps because they are innately better at survival in great heat with little water. All monsters must be prepared to go long periods with little or no sustenance. Any creature that is not a predator is a relentless scavenger or forager for any scrap of food and especially water it can find. Unique to Athas, almost all life, even animal life, has some sort of latent psionic talent. This unusual adaptation gives anything, even seemingly harmless animals, the vital edge in the game of survival. Though diverse in form, all Athasian creatures are solid proof that life clings with an incredible tenacity in the most hostile world imaginable. One of the most important herd animals used to carry people and heavy loads across the sands is the Crodlu. Crodlu resemble giant ostriches with thick scales instead of feathers. The creature combines the incredible endurance of a half-dwarf with the blindingly fast running speed of an elf. In combat, Crodlu strike with their powerful beak and try to grapple with their grasping claw hands. The beasts are prone to ornery behavior and are best raised as chicks to fully domesticate them. They make excellent pack beasts for caravans and others crossing the sands. A Crodlu's speed and naturally tough hide make them excellent mounts for skirmishing. A larger variant, known as the Heavy Crodlu, has been bred for use in combat by heavy cavalry. A Heavy Crodlu can carry up to 600 pounds on its back, fully accommodating a plate-armored warrior. Kanks are huge, six-legged beetle or ant-like insects that wander the Athasian wilderness. Kanks are about 8 feet long and typically taller than an adult human. The insects naturally arrange themselves into a hive society made up of workers, soldiers, and a breeder called the queen who lays kank eggs. Their flesh immediately putrefies after death, and is not considered edible even in times of starvation. Kanks do produce a sweet-tasting nectar that is much prized for its flavor. The beasts of burden are extremely hardy creatures, well adapted to desert living. They are surprisingly docile with proper training, and frequently herded by elves and humans. Kanks can carry heavy loads over long distances between city-states without tiring. If pressed, their strong mandibles can be used in combat to tear apart unprotected flesh. One of the mightiest creatures of Athas is the enormous airborne monster called a cloud ray. Cloud rays resemble waterborne manta rays, except that they are easily 100 feet long or more. Their fins flap gently on thermal currents, aiding the psionic flight ability that keeps them hundreds of feet in the air. Cloud rays spend almost all of their time in the sky and land only very occasionally. The rays wander aimlessly through the Athasian skies, devouring other flying creatures such as rocks, pterodactyls, and Aaracokra. Cloud rays prefer to use their 20-foot-wide jaws to swallow their prey whole, and grind them to liquid before it even reaches their digestive system. After eating, cloud rays may drift through the air asleep and psionically dream. Though innately possessing mental powers, cloud rays become enraged if anyone attempts to psionically contact them. They will do anything to kill the offending telepath. Their bodies terminate with a long spiked tail. A single thrash with the tail is strong enough to destroy a building. Cloud rays have no natural enemies. and are virtually impossible for even a large party to kill. Even giants and drakes leave these creatures alone. If a cloud ray is slain, its meat and hide would provide steady food and supplies for hundreds of people for months. Id fiends are giant lizards approximately 10 feet in length. The reptilian beasts are among the most dreaded predators on Athas because of their psionic abilities. Before engaging in combat, the Id fiend telepathically probes its victim's thoughts to discover their worst fears. It then projects those fears into the victim's mind. Creatures so affected suffer severe combat penalties, as they watch images of waking nightmares appear before them. Id fiends prefer to stalk and kill at night, to increase the effect of their terror ability. When it strikes, the Id Fiend is a formidable opponent with tough claws and a strong bite. They also have a number of other psionic abilities such as Psionic Crush and Ego Whip. Id Fiends inhabit all terrain types on Athas from jungles to deserts. Though difficult to slay, drinking Id Fiend blood is reputed to increase your psionic abilities. One of the deadliest forms of mimics is a gigantic beast known as the Dune Trapper. Dune Trappers appear on the surface to be delightful oases flowing with food and water. But it's all a ruse. The oasis is actually a bizarre organism that buries itself into the sand vertically, leaving its giant mouth exposed on the surface. It appears to be some sort of plant-animal hybrid, made up of thick cords of ropey, squid-like tentacular growths beneath a flat, vegetation-covered mouth. Anyone stepping on the surface of the mouth is assailed with acid damage from potent digestive juices squirted into the air. The mouth then snaps shut, dragging the entrapped prey below the surface. Any band of adventurers that miraculously find a paradise in the deep desert should exercise extreme caution, lest they end up as dinner. Brogue are 15-foot-tall muscular humanoids with 4 arms. In the wild, Brogue live in small clans of 3 to 4 family groups. They hunt and forage for their food and occasionally supplement their diet by raiding caravans or villages. Brogues have a primitive caveman-like culture. They can make simple tools or weapons such as spears, but have yet to master the use of fire. The Brogue typically wear rags made of animal hides. In the deserts, Brogue wander throughout the year to different hunting grounds or watering holes. Brogues can use any of their 4 hands to hold a weapon and can make 4 separate attacks per round. In the wilds, Brogues have become highly skilled at throwing boulders, big enough to crush a single man-sized opponent. Due to their great strength and ambidexterity, the giant kin are highly valued as gladiators in the great slave arenas. After capture, most Brogue are too stupid to attempt an escape. While in captivity, they are lulled into complacency by luxuries such as fresh cold water and sweet meats. The giants are considered too dangerous and valuable to ever be granted freedom by their masters, who treat them little better than animals. So-called renegade Brogue that manage to escape the slave pits are deadly foes due to their enhanced combat training and stolen armor. The most fearsome and powerful monster on the surface of Athas is the dragon. Athasian dragons are not created or born naturally. They are mortals who perform an elaborate transformation ritual. The ritual starts with the casting of the dragon metamorphosis spell by a 20th level Defiler psionicist. The transformation process involves years of study, travel to the elemental or astral planes, and the sacrificial offering of thousands of sentient creatures. Once the spell is cast, the Defiler begins to grow to great size. His skin will harden and turn to scales. Their mouths stretch out into a reptilian snout. Their limbs distort and stretch. Eventually, he will resemble a huge draconic mixing of reptilian and human features. Athasian dragons tend to walk, move, and sit like bipedal humans rather than the 4-legged type common on other worlds. This new stage does not diminish its psionic or magical abilities. Rather, they continue to develop staggering powers of the mind and retain the arcane abilities they had before their transformation. An Athasian dragon has scales as hard as steel plate armor, and eventually can only be hit by magical weapons. The dragon also gains a breath weapon, a 50-foot-long cone of burning sand. From the beginning of the process, the dragon becomes immortal and ceases to age normally. The dragon gradually sprouts huge wings and grows to a mighty 40 feet and 50,000 pounds. All of their spellcasting abilities are retained and powered by magical obsidian orbs inside their bodies. These orbs allow them to drain the essence from living creatures rather than plants to charge their spells. The combination of psionic, magical, and physical might is overwhelming and akin to that of a demigod. All of the reigning Sorcerer-Kings have undergone this partial transformation into dragonhood. The later stages of the ascension are so agonizing and painful that the aspirant will go completely insane. They are unable to act or think of anything except wreaking terrible destruction on anything they come across. The only person on Athas who was known to have completed the entire ritual and reached the mightiest stage of the dragon is Boris, the man who killed Rajat. Yet despite his accumulation of thousands of years of magical, martial, and psionic might, despite his gigantic impenetrable form, his ability to turn invisible to create illusions of himself, despite exerting godlike authority over the other Sorcerer-Kings, the dragon, after 2,000 years and more as Lord of Athas, was slain by mortal hands. Using Boris's own sword, the Scourge of Rakard, he was slain by Rikus the Half-Dwarf, the same man that killed Kalak, the Sorcerer King of Tyr. A being born into slavery who lived only for the entertainment of others, crushed this apotheosis of evil with his own hand. The dragon is a potent symbol of the importance of moral choice everyone must exert as a champion, hero, or adventurer. If you travel long enough, you will reach such an epic level of ability you have to decide whether your continuing authority is really worth it to the rest of the world. The ancient heroes of Athas were monomaniacs who cared more for their own glory and might than continuing the vital balance of nature. Too much living essence was concentrated in too few hands, leading to a bleak, deadly world filled with suffering and slavery. The dragons of Athas are the ultimate cautionary tale about the obsessive lust for greatness by the individual. If heroes exist to be beacons that the common man can aspire to, if your heroes are evil as they were in the time of Rajat, then the world itself will turn as corrupt, bleak, empty, barren, and horrible as those heroes' souls. You can achieve everything, absolute true godlike power, it is possible, but the cost is the ruination of your home, your people, your body, your soul, and your world. Not all is gloom under the red sun, however. The promise of a transcendence of serene, peaceful light is also possible, if only in theory. The counterpart to the dragon is the Evangion, a creature created by the apotheosis of a 20th level preserver psionicist. The Evangion is the equal and opposite reaction of good to the dragon's hateful malevolence. The Evangion only slowly loses his mortal form. First, his limbs begin to stretch, becoming long, thin, and weak. His skin turns a radiant silver or gold, and elegant gossamer wings grow from his back. The creature's legs soon become too weak to support his weight, and he must fly or levitate everywhere. Its head becomes elongated and alien-like. The new Evangion creature is physically rather weak, especially compared to the armored musculature of the dragon. But the new being is a powerhouse of magic and psionics, perhaps even greater than the dragon is. The Evangion's wisdom and intelligence increases to a superhuman, almost godlike level. Dragons and Evangion detest one another on a primal level, and erupt into furious violence when they cross paths. While dragons prefer unbridled aggression, Evangions choose more subtle defensive tactics. The consequences of these two demigod-like beings clashing can be devastating to everything around them. The Evangion radiates an aura of pure hope and goodness. This aura grows to become a ray of enfeeblement, protection from evil, and globe of invulnerability against evil creatures. There is no phase of bestial violence coupled with madness during the transformation, like there is with his draconic counterpart. The final stage of power is reached by restoring a 5-mile square area of desert to lush, watered vegetation, creating life rather than taking it as the dragon does. The aspirant disappears to plains unknown for several years before returning as an avatar of goodness. No one on Athas has yet reached the ultimate stage of good to match the darkness of the dragon Boris. Somehow they have become stuck just before reaching that final level, but the hope is still there. Hope not just to reach a grandeur of power, but to become a living vessel of change that can restore life to the barren sands of a dead world. Those few lesser Evangions that exist are willing to champion the cause of good of heroes on epic adventures, to restore nature and the world to its proper state. The city-states are all that is left of pre-war human civilization. After 2,000 years of warfare, blight, and ecological ruin, only 7 of these urban states still exist in the Tier lands. The buildings tend to be functional, drab, and designed to keep out the heat and wind. Houses are built of stone, adobe, or mud brick. Especially among the poor, houses are cheaply built and must be repaired or rebuilt frequently. Streets vary based on the whim of that particular sorcerer king, with some being ramshackle and winding, while others are arranged in precise geometric order. Water access is all important to every inhabitant. Typically, the wells are owned by wealthy nobles or merchants and sold at staggering fees to the poor. Riots, crime, and slave revolts are common events in the poorer sections of the city. Any society is just 3 meals away from revolution. Athasians are lucky to get 1 decent meal a day, and barely enough water to live. Barely concealed hatred and anger from the lowest are kept at bay through brutal repression by the king's guards. The guards' access to priestly magic, expert training in metal weapons, make them nearly invincible to the miserable poor. Psionic powers may be used to invade the thoughts of recalcitrant citizens. The freeborn laborers, traders, craftsmen, artisans, and soldiers are under the total dominance of the Sorcerer King and his aristocratic lackeys. Soaring above most cities is a titanic ziggurat or pyramid. Once the symbolic home of the distant gods, the ziggurats are now the temporal home of the ascended dragon kings. These stepped pyramids are powerful fortifications intended to project the might and glory of the kings down onto their people. Templars may live in or near the pyramids to watch over their patron. The monumental structures are often magically warded and almost impossible to assail with conventional means. Breaking into the home of the evil megalomaniacs in charge of Athas is almost certainly going to be fatal. However, if a canny group of adventurers manage to enter undetected, they could find countless artifacts pillaged by the Sorcerer Kings over thousands of years. Crops are raised in huge fields that surround the city-states. Typical staples include barley and wheat, that is made into a sludgy stew for the farmers and slave workers. Meat is rare for the poor and a delicacy for slaves. Arable land is at a premium on Athas. Thus, huge irrigation systems need to be created to channel the requisite water onto the parched fields. The water channels are dug by slaves, a fatal job in the roasting heat. The surrounding villages amidst the croplands are feudal dependents of their adjacent city-state. Work in the fields is nightmarish, but preferred by some citizens because of the laxity of control the Templar police have in outlying districts. During the frequent conflicts between city-states, the first violence is typically economic. Any crops left in the fields when a hostile force arrives are eaten, farm implements are destroyed, fruit trees uprooted, and precious irrigation channels destroyed. The knife edge that life dances on in the Athasian desert makes war instantly brutal. Mercy, chivalry, or comradeship are unknown in Athasian conflicts. Something as trivial as killing an Erdlu or scattering a herd of Kanks is going to tip the hard-pressed populace into starvation within days. To show a moment of weakness against a foe is to invite suicidal hardship. The majority of warfare on Athas never exceeds raiding and ravaging the outlying settlements. Soldier predators stalk the wilds looking for isolated people to enslave for profit. Theft of food or water, a fairly minor crime in most wars, is a matter of life and death on Athas. The Templar guards of the Sorcerer King form the tough inner core of Athasian soldiery. Templars typically have the best training and are the only ones equipped with metal armor or weapons. They also possess the best morale because they have a greater share in the rewards of victory than lowly conscripts. The rest of the army is drafted by force from the free Athasian citizens. This force is usually little better than a militia, but some city-states such as Draj are known for a strong warrior tradition, even among commoners. The lowest of the low are made up of slaves dragged along to carry equipment and build encampments. The most dangerous jobs of siege work, like filling in pits around walls, or forming human shields around battering rams, are left to these miserable wretches. Yet the army is one of the few places a slave may be able to extract themselves from their degraded state. A slave that shows exceptional fighting prowess may be elevated from drudge to slave soldier and then on to freedom. However, most slaves pulled along with the army die a miserable death as cannon fodder. If an army manages to cross the desert to a neighboring city-state, itself no easy task as the dunes can swallow entire armies before they ever reach the enemy, a siege begins. All Athasian city-states have sturdy walls that must be breached by rams, overtopped by towers, or tunneled under by mines. The walls are typically of sophisticated construction with sturdy gates, murder holes, and deep pits to prevent rolling up siege towers. As usual, the ferocious heat of Athas lends sieges an added layer of extreme fatigue and difficulty. Most armies break from lack of food or water long before they come close to breaching a city's walls. Siege engines are often titanic constructions that can be carried on the back of enormous draft animals called the mechalote. The 30-foot-long lizards can easily weigh 12,000 pounds, and carry an entire siege tower filled with soldiers right up to the walls. Another pack animal helpful during a siege is the Inox. An Inox is a 15-foot-long lizard that can weigh up to 4,000 pounds. Its back is protected by a thick, armored shell that can easily deflect most missile fire, and batter down guard towers or gates with their mighty jaws and muscular tails. Giants from the Silt Sea can be paid or persuaded to join in a siege. If the dull-witted giants keep their bargains, they can smash through walls with ease, or even step over them and assault the population directly. The giants tend to have poor morale, however, and frequently flee after seizing whatever treasure or slaves are to hand, before encountering heavy resistance. Half-giants also make interesting additions to sieges because of how swiftly these 10-foot-tall creatures can scale a wall or tower. If an army does manage to break into a city, completely crushing any resistance therein is a tough feat. Most sorcerer-kings are paranoid about their own populations, and fill city streets with guard towers and barracks to keep an eye on their own population. An invader will have to fight his way through all of these in order to reach the palace of the Sorcerer King themselves. The accumulated magical power of thousands of years is at the Sorcerer King's disposal. Killing one is an almost impossible feat without the help of at least one other god king. Yet recently in the great city of Tyr, just such an act was achieved. King Kalak of Tyr attempted to perform a bloody-handed ritual that would ascend him to the ultimate stage of godhood. Kalak wished to transform into a mighty dragon, awash in power over all life on Athas. In order to bring about this transfiguration, Kalak built the largest ziggurat ever seen. This stone edifice was not a palace per se, but a giant sacrificial altar that would drain the life from every man, woman, and child in the city of Tyr at a stroke. These heinous machinations were brought to an end by the combined efforts of a team of mortal heroes. The killing blow was performed by Ricus, a half-dwarven gladiator who threw a magical spear through Kalak's black heart. Aiding him in this task was Sadira, a half-elven sorceress who has welcomed preservers into Tyr for the first time in thousands of years, along with the female gladiator Neva. One of the Kingslayers, Tithian the Templar, was proclaimed king of Tyr. Tithian is brutal and wicked, but knows how to accede to the whims of the mob clamoring for more freedom. Slavery, that vital part of the economy, has been abolished. The slave quarters have been emptied, and free men labor in the fields for a wage. Admittedly, a pittance of a wage, but it's without the heavy spiked whip to keep them in line, or the threat of death if they don't perform. Tithian has gained significant popularity by decreeing that every citizen is entitled to 1 jug of water per day. The city has become a hotbed of feverish political activity, as nobles, ex-slaves, sorcerers, templars, and merchants vie with one another for power. The faction most eager to cling to power after Kalak's demise is Tyr's aristocracy. Not everyone on Athas is born into a life of suffering. A lucky few families have worked their way up to the highest rungs of society, as a hereditary caste of the Sorcerer King's agents. Nobles reach their status through ownership of the water supply, farmlands, mines, and vast numbers of slave work gangs. The nobility also belong to a hereditary council or parliament, though in practice this body has no independence and merely serves to enact the Sorcerer King's will. Dominance over wealth, water, and men provides the nobles time to indulge their decadent whims. Their houses are great mansions with shaded courtyards, pools of water, and dozens of slaves skilled in every art of pleasure. All of the remaining Sorcerer Kings rule over their domains with absolute tyranny. Rights, even the few accorded to medieval peasants and serfs on other worlds, are essentially non-existent. The word of the Sorcerer King is law. Their orders are enforced by a powerful class of soldier priests known as Templars. The dreadful magic that deified Rajat's champions also opened through them a channel into the elemental planes. Though the God Kings may not use this power themselves, they have the ability to bestow the magic of the elements onto their worshippers as if they had become gods. The Templars in all cities are rightly feared for their brutality. They possess the power of life and death over everyone, no matter their noble status or wealth, and instantly kill or imprison anyone showing the slightest hint of rebellion. The Templars are themselves under the brutal dominance of the Sorcerer King, and may find themselves the subject of his wrath just as much as anyone else. Templars have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo in the city-states, as their power depends upon it. It is not unknown, however, for Templars, such as Tithian, to work against the power of the Sorcerer King if he has gone totally mad with power, like Kalak did. Underpinning the entire Athasian economy is the pitiless institution of slavery. Countless men and women of all races are forced into a life of degradation and toil. Every day they rise to the whips of their masters, suffer savage flogging, and if they survive 16 hours or more of backbreaking labor, return to a dingy barracks to eat maggoty bread or gruel. The hardest and most lethal work is given to these wretches, including scraping away the last miserable bits of iron ore from the long-exhausted mines, hauling stones to repair city walls, baking mud bricks and building the mighty pyramids and ziggurats that house the Sorcerer King and his army. The slaves come from many sources, including prisoners of war, stateless folk from the wastes seized by mercantile brigands, or debtors squeezed of the last thing of value they possess, their lives. The lives of the free citizens of Athasian city-states are privileged only in comparison to the nightmarish existence of a slave. Most commoners must also break their backs every day without hope of improving their lot in life. Farmers, herdsmen, builders, unskilled laborers make up most of the lower classes. The life of a free man, whether farmer or skilled artisan, hangs on a knife's edge. All it takes is a greedy Templar to judge them guilty of a crime, the punishment for which is almost always slavery. A lucky few citizens may become artisans and run small workshops making all of the day-to-day goods of city life. Ceramics, tools, cookery, textiles, weaving, along with innkeeping and running shops. A few may even specialize in the crafting of the unique weaponry and armor out of chitin, leather, bone, and obsidian. This small middle class fiercely guards its status, lest they fall back into the degrading life of a mere laborer, or worse, a slave. Typically, slavery is imposed on only the most vulnerable and powerless citizens. The artisan class is ready to defend itself with weapons if they need to from overreaching Templars or nobles. Where this petit bourgeois falls in the schema of liberty and tyranny is unclear. The freedmen often employ at least a slave or two for domestic or commercial work, supporting the bondage of their fellows. Yet the free citizen militia is the only potential military challenge to the Sorcerer Kings. Persuasion, charisma, and good luck may shift them to either side, or neutrality, in a conflict between the higher and lower orders. Yet another faction exerts its influence in the cities of Athas, the merchant houses. The traders of Athas have united in these consortiums to manage the buying and selling of goods between the fractious domains of the Sorcerer Kings. They've also banded together for protection from threats both within the city-states and without. They are responsible for purchasing, transporting, warehousing, and distributing all of the precious items only available across the Wicked Dunes. Every agent upon joining a merchant house must swear to follow strict rules called the Merchant's Code. First and foremost is that all members must forsake citizenship in any city or tribe. Your allegiance is henceforth with the trading community and no one else. The merchants also swear to assist fellow traders who are in extremis, and follow all laws of whatever city-state they are currently in. The merchants have little desire to make waves with the status quo, nor do they wish to further the Sorcerer King's bids for military dominance over the entirety of the tier lands. Traders wisely remain neutral in any conflict, whether political, racial, or religious, as long as they can make a healthy profit by doing so. Slavery is one of the largest sources of revenue for traders. Any activity such as the rebellion against Kalak that seeks to destroy that institution will likely be resisted forcefully, at least at first. The merchants of Tyr are nothing if not adaptable and are complying, at least temporarily, with the abolition of bondage. Despite their fondness for slavery, the merchant houses are in some ways a challenge to the omnipotence of the God King's authority. They defend their own from anyone, including brutal Templars that try to impede trading rights. Moving goods across the desert is the vital lubrication that makes sure the private kingdoms of the Sorcerer Kings do not grind to a halt. The most intrepid Athasians work on the mighty caravan circuits that continually inch across the deserts. As hard as life in the cities can be, at least you can be reasonably sure of food, water, and shelter, however inadequate. Out in the wastes, predators lurk around every dune waiting for the faintest sign of weakness. Punishing heat and desperate raiders with nothing to lose stalk the caravan routes. The risks are extreme, but so are the rewards. Trading is one of the only modes of upward mobility in the highly stratified society of Athas. After a long day of miserable toil, one of the few things that can rouse the brutalized Athasian population is the arena. Gladiatorial bouts are extremely popular with all levels of society, all the way up to the Sorcerer-Kings themselves. Matches are savage and often fought to the death. Battles between gladiators are interspersed with bouts against the most savage Athasian wildlife that can be corralled, starved, tormented, and let loose to tear combatants apart. The crowds bay for blood and will quickly riot if the amount of carnage is less than satisfying. A coliseum of some sort is to be found in every city-state to soothe the rages of the population. The excitation of bloodlust has a useful brutalizing effect on the people. The more the commoners learn to ease their pain by watching the suffering of others, the less likely they are to show empathy for slaves or enemy states.
He did not care anymore. Life and death, the same.
It is possible, though extremely rare, for a gladiator to earn his or her freedom by turning spectacular victories into popularity with the crowd. If someone is ferocious enough in the ring, they may find themselves recruited into the city-state's army, or bought by a merchant house to guard their opulent villas. Some of the most dangerous events in Athasian cities have been revolts organized by the gladiators themselves, who use their incredible martial skills to turn the cities that chain them into abattoirs. Though the majority of the population lives in the cities, a not inconsiderable number dwell in the deserts themselves. As much as the thick walls cage a citizen within, they also halt the depredations of the myriad wasteland predators hunting for flesh. The villages set between the mighty cities are inhabited by a hardy folk, well versed in the daily struggle against the winds, sun, and sand. Most villagers have at least a rudimentary skill with weapons, in order to fight off bandits, Thri-Kreen, slavers, and rampaging armies from the cities. Villagers usually sit astride a valuable resource, such as water, mines, or a trade crossroads. In contrast to the sclerotic dictatorships in the cities, free villages are febrile hubs for charismatic leaders, political dialogue, and more or less true democracy. The most precarious existence is led by the settlements of runaway slaves. They must not only survive the wastes, but must do so unaligned to any city-state. Slave villages are usually hidden in the deep deserts, far from any trade routes or cities. The society of ex-slaves is based on the unique experience each of them have with the cruelties of bondage. Each former slave is acutely aware of each other's freedom, and takes great means to avoid compulsion, force, and tyranny against one another. Exceptionally strong and charismatic ex-slaves often become leaders, but take great pains to avoid enforcing their will too strongly. Each man is encouraged to voice his opinion, and is free to reject any decision that goes against his personal wishes. Despite this openly democratic system, it is united by the collective need for survival. Ex-slaves form the tightest of bonds Athas can offer, based on shared experience, collective hardship, and the ever-tightening noose of slavers looking to return them to bondage. Between fellow slaves, a strict code of friendship and peace is followed. Against anyone else, anything goes. Raiding and theft are often necessary to survival for the cut-off slave communities. Foraging and hunting can be difficult in the wastes, and plundering a caravan or two can make all the difference. Slaves discovered during the raids may be offered freedom and a chance to join a new community. Anyone else may be put to the sword. Good money is paid to unscrupulous rogues who discover hidden slave villages and inform slavers of their location. Outsiders that accidentally stray across slave villages may be killed to keep the village a secret. Constant weapons training is vital to any slave community, lest an army of brutal slavers wipe them away in a heartbeat. Despite lack of food, water, proper weapons, traders, and the omnipresent threat of brigands, these communities of ex-slaves continue to grow. They are on the front line of resisting the terror of the Sorcerer-Kings and the brutal society they have crafted. If the ex-slaves ever managed to unite, they would be a force that could shake all of Athasian culture. Most Athasians possess a certain callousness toward others because of the brutal calculus of survival, but those who have abandoned any sense of morality whatsoever leave society behind to become a wasteland bandit. These villains are usually forced to flee the wrath of Templars, merchant houses, and average citizens in the cities. To avoid justice, they have to live a hardscrabble life among the dunes, deep in isolated caves or ramshackle huts erected near trade routes. The raiders wait. When fat merchants or travelers happen by, they strike with unbridled ferocity, cutting down anything that gets in their way. Law officers from adjacent city-states should, in theory, be working to track down the bandits and eliminate them, but canny bandit leaders pay off city officials for a cut of the profit in slaves and loot. Too many years slaying and slaving reduce a bandit to an almost feral state. The Ravagers become more akin to animalistic desert predators than people. While there are many similarities, all of the city-states have their own unique qualities to them. Drage, for instance, is a heavily militarized state run by Tectocticle. Tectocticle claims to be the son of Athas's twin moons, sent as a living god to rule the world. The people of Drage wear feathered headdresses and wield mighty clubs tipped with shards of obsidian. They have become expert at landing disabling blows to the legs, and carrying off these crippled prisoners to their mighty stepped pyramids. The 300-foot-tall Father and Master Pyramid Temple serves as a giant bloody altar from which the moon priests sacrifice prisoners to their living god. Built into one of the only remaining forests on Athas is Gulg. Gulg is ruled by Lulali Pugh, the Forest Queen, a mysterious sorcerer that also claims to be a living god. The wall surrounding Gulg is not made of stone, it is a giant hedge of sharpened thorns. The thorns are enchanted to seek out and entangle themselves around enemies. Into the forest, the God Queen sends her headhunters to drag people back in chains and sacrifice them. Her Dark Templars have mastered the ability to trap a man's soul inside his own shrunken head, leaving the enslaved spirit as a gruesome guard around her forest kingdom. Most terrifying of all the cities is one almost forgotten by Athasians, the city of Gwistanol. Gwistanol was once the home of Drigoth, the sorcerer king known as the Ravager of Giants. Drigoth attempted to ascend into godhood through dark rituals. The Sorcerer Kings, in a rare show of unity, gathered together to slay Drigoth and destroy his city. Drigoth, in his arrogance, attempted to create a race of human-like dragons to mirror his own ascended form. These reptilian creatures, called Dre, formed a new race of worshippers and slaves in Gwistanol. A few of these Dre creatures managed to survive the sacking of their city, and use necromantic magic to restore Drigoth to life. Now Drigoth is the Lich, known as the Dread King. He retreated underground with his reptilian creations, and plots to return one day and replace all life on Athas with his creatures. The essence of all the complexities of Athasian society hinges on the interplay of two principles, liberty and slavery. In the city-states, the sorcerer kings and queens have created the most absolute form of control possible over the hearts, bodies, and through psionic discipline, minds of their subjects. In many ways, they have effectively become gods in the eyes of the people. Yet no matter how absolute power appears, there are always cracks in the system to exploit. The merchants, Templars, freemen, slaves, druids, sorcerers, and gladiators of all races and societies seem to be permanently at odds. To break this chain is possible, and the deposing of Kalak is proof of that. It will take a Herculean effort to bring about the end of tyranny in a city-state or all the city-states of Athas. It's an effort only those called heroes could accomplish. Where will the heroes destined to change the face of the ruined world of Athas come from? Some of the sapient creatures of the wasteland are familiar to other planets, such as elves, dwarves, humans, and halflings, but they are in many ways twisted parodies of their brethren on more civilized worlds like Faerun. The harsh light of the red sun and the pitiless exposure to millennia of cruelty and suffering have radically transformed the humanoid folk. The barest physical resemblance is often all that is left in an unrecognizably savage outer shell. Other races are bizarre entities found in numbers only on Athas, such as the alien Thri-Kreen mantis men, or the dinosaur-like pterodactyl men called Terran. Whatever their shape or culture, all the thinking peoples under the dark sun are brutally conditioned to survive against any odds. You won't find a populace of any race better suited to the grim trials of adventuring. Elves were known to be graceful, freedom-loving champions of good, who adored art and self-expression. Yet on Athas, the elves are uniformly degenerate, lazy, and fatalistic. They have fun not as an expression of joie de vivre, but to squeeze as much happiness as they can from a life they know to be short and pointless. They dwell in the nomadic camps far in the wilderness, hunting or stealing for their sustenance. Husbandry is unknown to the elves, who disdain all farming because of the excessive toil it involves. Athasian elves are taller than their Faerunian cousins, standing between 6.5 and 7.5 feet tall. Their movements are unnaturally graceful, almost effortlessly dancer-like. Though their limbs appear thin, they possess layers of tightly compacted, wiry muscle. Though often fair-skinned on other worlds, the dark Athasian sun has burned elven skin a dusky tan or copper. Much of elven life can be understood through their unique conception of time. Elves do not speak of the linear progression of time as most others understand it. For an elf, the world is in an everlasting present called the now. If an elf is forced by circumstance or tragedy to ruminate on the lost past or the impossible future, they will succumb to melancholy, anxiety, and eventually violent madness. Unlike on other worlds such as Faerun or Greyhawk, elves scarcely live longer than 120 years. Elves work only as much as they absolutely need to survive and enjoy the moment. Elves are not capable of the slow, steady application of work to a long-term project over months or years. Their communities are nomadic, partially because they refuse to build anything more permanent than a tent or yurt. When an elf does work on something that interests them, it can be with a ferocious but short-lived passion. The day-to-day grind of herding or hunting is done with frequent breaks and distractions. Elves often use their inherently high intelligence for swift bursts of creative genius, without the necessary methodical follow-up work typical of dwarves or humans. After a day's labor, elves renew themselves with ecstatic gatherings filled with song and dance. All of the energy they did not exert during the working day they spend playing music and telling tales of the ancient myths of the elven race. Elven children are trained from birth to have fun even when learning the skills to survive. To a human, play is a distraction from labor, but the elves have meshed the two into a single act. Even training in hunting, herding, or fighting has an element of a game. Almost every other race on Athas has a grim, dour attitude about the futile struggle to live, but an elf remains merry through any hardship. The elves have a superiority complex about themselves. No code of ethics is required when interacting when non-elven, supposedly inferior peoples are involved. This has led to a considerable amount of bigotry, not altogether unwarranted, from other Athasians who consider elves liars, cheats, and thieves. Many elves use their nomadic lifestyle to work as traders, tricking an unsuspecting customer into vastly overpaying or even selling them a useless item as a common tactic for an elf merchant. While an elf will not sully his hands with farmer's tools, he will gladly spend hours and hours haggling for the best price he can gull a fool into paying. In the desert, elves are free from the absolute control of the Sorcerer-Kings and merchant houses that human or dwarf traders must make obeisance to. Elf peddlers in the wild may be the best place to find items that are rare or banned in the city-states. Elves have no compunction against using arcane magic and will happily provide goods for use in sorcery, even of the defiling kind. Elves respect the danger the city-states represent, but they never pass up an opportunity to exploit someone not of their people. Raiding is a common means of supporting the tribe, especially in lean years. Their speed, supernatural grace, and powerful mounts make elves exceptionally skilled at lightning-fast strikes against slow-moving caravans. Elves have no real concept of racial unity, only the tribe matters. Elves of another tribe are just as much a target for violence or theft as anyone else. After stripping a caravan bare, the pillagers escape back into the wilds, where no sane man could follow. For the elves, it is not only their right, but their natural duty in life to outwit and take what they want from the slow, stumbling races of humans and dwarves. Yet such is the chaos of elven hearts that one season they may be brutal raiders and the next friendly traders. Ever in the present time, elves see no discrepancy occupying one role and then the other back and forth. Distrust of elven perfidy is compounded by their inherent affinity for arcane magic. Elves have become so fatalistic about the death of Athas they don't hold the same stigma toward defiling magic as most other species do. The planet will die anyway, and it's only right to take what you can with the time left. Not all elves are necessarily content with defilers, but the general lackadaisical attitude about the subject is enough to make a human or halfling's blood boil. Psionics are freely practiced among the elves, though their chaotic nature means they have no formal schools of the way of the mind like in the city-states. Clerical magic comes less naturally to the elves. Each tribe has a shaman known as an element singer. Though oft feared by the superstitious elves, these clerics serve as lore keepers for their clan, and uphold the tribe's laws and traditions. The singer must be a cleric in the particular element that tribe holds sacred in their unique culture. Most elves remain free of the Sorcerer-King's tyranny. They inhabit the desert wastes in nomadic camps. These camps are typically made up of collapsible tents made from kank hide. The elves wander wherever their hearts take them, usually far away from any humans they've recently robbed or victimized. Anyone looking to become a friend of an elven tribe is going to have to perform an extraordinary service for them, and even then they won't be seen as truly one of the people without undergoing the tribe's customary coming-of-age rituals. Most tribes have some sort of codes about accepting non-elven members in dire circumstances, but it is extremely rare for them to do so. Across all tribes, there is a tradition that half-elven offspring must be exposed and left to die. Naturally, this is not always followed, but it is indicative of the fear and disdain the elves have for those not of their race. Not all elves live in the wilds. Many have decided to settle down, at least temporarily, with humans in the great cities. They must endure the vicious prejudices city dwellers have for their nomadic kin. Templars expect elves to commit a crime at some point during their stay and keep a close eye on these pointy-eared guests. Elf traders are looked on with suspicion and jealousy by the merchant guilds. Despite these challenges, most city-states host permanent settlements of elf citizens, willing to abandon freedom for the security of city life. Elven slaves are difficult to keep. Their natural love of wide open spaces has given many elves a paralyzing claustrophobia. Escape attempts, even futile ones that lead to immediate death, are preferred to captivity. The only place elf slaves may excel are in the gladiatorial arenas. The exotic flavor of elf combatants is alluring to jaded audiences looking to spice up their blood sports. Elves are as tall and dexterous as their kin on other worlds. On Athas, they have learned to become exceptionally swift and are able to traverse the burning sands with blinding speed. Elves can race across the wasteland all day in the blazing sun and never tire or slow down. Heat is barely a concern to the elves, who can survive temperatures of 110 degrees without any negative effect or even losing water by breaking a sweat. The elves do not merely survive the desert, they have become one with its hardships. Elves do not merely endure racing, they enjoy the exertion and freedom it brings. Running is not a mere survival technique, it's a fundamental part of their culture. If you can no longer keep up with the tribe, it is believed that your time has come, and you are left to your fate in the desert. The elves have become a strange mix of raucous merrymakers and cold-hearted survivalists. The other races are still trying to bend and twist Athas through industry and magic. The elves are content to shift themselves to the world's rhythm, no matter how brutal it may have become. Elven adventurers make excellent rangers. Nomadic living has given all elves an inherent understanding of how to avoid the dangers of the wastes, and how to expertly forage food and water. Their long dancer's legs, heroic skill with archery, and irrepressible energy make them mighty hunters of food or foes. In combat, elves value speed over strength. The expression "slash your enemy 3 times before he knows you're there" emphasizes the elves' reliance on moving fast. Elves have a natural weapon bonus when using long swords and longbows, weapons they've trained with all their lives. An elven companion would ensure the best prices when bartering for goods and ensure the party is not cheated. An elven party member would be something of an enigma at first, though. Has she succumbed to her natural wanderlust and decided to slay and explore for a living? Have they been kicked out of their tribe and wander bleakly without a home to ever return to? How will the elf respond to his compatriots and their attitudes towards his people? Will he become more settled like the city dwellers? Athasian elves are not bleak sufferers of the wasteland like the dour dwarves, enslaved Muls, or brutalized humans. Elves have adapted their minds and souls to living in an empty wasteland fraught with danger. Perhaps traveling with one will spread some of that wild joy to the rest of his comrades. The only way to avoid letting the bleakness of the wasteland ruin your soul is freeing your mind, and learning to enjoy every precious moment before the end is just as useful a survival technique as finding water or food. Though the dwarf butcher went to his task with fanatical rage, the stout folk survived Rajat and his crusaders. The dwarves were torn from their mountain kingdoms and forced out into the harsh light of the Athasian deserts. They have unexpectedly thrived in the world of the Dark Sun, and now form a considerable proportion of the Sorcerer-King's subject peoples. Dwarves stand between 4.5 and 5 feet tall. Despite their short stature, dwarven bodies are wide and heavily muscled, giving them a weight of around 200 pounds. Dwarves have a preternaturally strong endurance that allows them to toil in the blazing sun far longer than a human. Thanks to the punishing heat, dwarves have developed weathered, copper-colored skin. Their skin is tough and leathery with calloused hands from a lifetime of hard labor. Dwarves spend their adult life completing what they call a focus. Focus is a long-standing goal that consumes their every waking thought and provides the most consistent satisfaction to their existence. The focus can be any number of things, such as constructing a new village, discovering a lost artifact, or defeating a powerful foe. Most dwarves will have several focuses during their lives. Dwarves that die without having completed their life's focus return to Athas as undead banshees, venting their wrath on anyone they find. Because of their incredible toughness and fanatical dedication to working, dwarves are highly valued as craftsmen and laborers in city-states. Most city-states have a considerable dwarven population, many of whom are employed as artisans and weapon or armor smiths. Dwarven strength and endurance make them excellent trainers of wild beasts. Outside of the cities, dwarves still live in a few scattered villages that fiercely cling to their independence. The largest dwarf settlement are the twin cities of North and South Lidopolis, occupying the opposite sides of a river in the Forked Tongue estuary. Because the city is unaligned to the Sorcerer-Kings, it is used as a trading center for the great merchant houses, providing a hefty sum of revenue for the dwarves. The city's leader is currently attempting to build a massive stone bridge across the Silt to connect the north and south sections of the town. A towering pyramid dedicated to the dwarves' primordial gods dominates the center of the city. Dwarves are also highly regarded warriors, and many have hired themselves out as guards or mercenaries. Dwarves are hardy combatants and less likely to be weakened by the grinding temperature of the desert. Dwarves cannot, however, use any kind of arcane magic, restricting them to clerical abilities and psionics only. Joining adventuring groups may be done for the standard reasons of loot and excitement, but many dwarves join as part of their life's focus. Companions that help a dwarf complete their focus are considered trusted comrades, but problems could arise if the party's actions are seen to hinder the pursuit of that focus. Dwarves are notorious for fighting until the bitter end long after victory seems feasible, probably a remnant of their collective racial struggle against Rajat that almost destroyed their people. After thousands of years of persecution, loss of home, and even of their written language, the dwarves are a testament to the will to survive under any conditions. The most drastic change occurred with the ruination of the Halfling race. On other worlds, Halflings are merry, food-loving pranksters, fond of song and companionship. Thousands of years spent dwelling in the ferocious jungles near the Ringing Mountains have totally transformed the peaceful little folk. These small, almost child-sized people have become vicious savages that murder any outsider they encounter as a matter of course. The diminutive hunters then cannibalize their victims' flesh to add much-needed protein to their diet. Wandering into Halfling territory is widely considered a death sentence for the more refined folk of the Tierlands. Though derided as barbarous, the Halflings think little of the so-called civilization of men. Halflings are a chaotic race who do not practice slavery, an institution with particular horror to their freedom-loving people. Halflings, perhaps as an echo to their origins in the Blue Age, love the natural world with an all-encompassing passion. Their hatred for defilers is boundless, and they disdain the other races, who submit to the tyranny of the god-kings. Halfling slaves wither and die quickly in bondage. The Forest Ridge is a wide stretch of rainforest hugging the spine of the Ringing Mountains to north and south. The jungle of tall fir and birch trees and undergrowth of bamboo hides a great amount of animals, insects, and reptiles. Most Athasians have never imagined in their wildest dreams mile upon mile of densely packed vegetation, with rain falling nearly every day. Despite the natural bounty, the jungle is far from a paradise. Aside from the murderous packs of cannibalistic halflings, the forest holds hundreds of dangerous fauna and flora. Barely visible insects and arachnids, each stinging and biting with deadly neurotoxins that can fell a half-giant in under a minute. Snakes and lizards of enormous sizes, carnivorous plants that look like any other patch of jungle until they snap shut and spray acidic digestive juices that eat through armor and flesh. Mighty ruins of destroyed civilizations, invisible in the tangled masses of jungle, promise rich pickings to those foolhardy enough to explore them. Despite the dangers, the Halflings have learned to thrive in the jungles. Where humans or dwarves would see a death trap, the Halflings view the rainforest as the beating heart of nature. They love nothing more than being surrounded by precious greenery, and cannot fathom how other races so casually abandon plants to ruin in the deserts. Halfling fondness for vegetation extends so far that their diet has become entirely carnivorous. Halflings stand between 3 and 4 feet tall and are physically rather weak compared to humans or elves. Their extraordinary dexterity and agility makes them excellent rogues. The Halfling tribes are masters of guerrilla warfare with darts, slings, and arrows or javelins coated with deadly poison. They are especially dangerous in their native forest habitat, having learned the secrets of living in union with nature. Deadly panthers, keres, and other animals are semi-domesticated and used as guards for hidden villages. As with other halflings on other worlds, remaining completely unnoticed and hidden to everyone else is a special talent of the halflings. Deadly traps, pits filled with poison stakes, and the jungle itself is their weapon. A particularly terrible weapon is loading their slings with live agony beetles, an insect that causes and then feeds off dreadful pain in its victims. Halflings are rare in the Tierlands and frequently mistrusted because of the reputation of their savage kin. However, some little folk do have the same wanderlust as other races and go adventuring. The world of men is often bizarre to the halfling, and it may take time for him to adjust to its customs. Informing halfling party members that it is important to refrain from dining on intelligent creatures is highly recommended. Halflings make perfect scouts and thieves because of their tiny size and skill at stalking prey. Companions must be careful not to perform or associate with defiling magic, lest they lose a halfling party member permanently. Generally good aligned parties that work towards restoring the land and freeing slaves will have a solid comrade in a halfling. Soaring above the petty terrestrial races is the avian Aaracokra. These bird-like humanoids are surprisingly light, rarely averaging over 100 pounds due to their hollow bones. Aaracokra stand between 7 and 8 feet tall with wingspans of up to 20 feet. Their huge wings allow them to carry many times their body weight, while soaring on thermal gusts of air. Plumage runs the gamut from earth tones white, silver, blue, and red. They possess a heavy vulture-like beak that they can use in combat, but only while on the ground. And Aaracokra's hands sit at the center of their wings, and cannot be used while flying. While on the ground, their hands can be used to carry and use weapons or tools. While in the air, an Aarakokra can use its dexterous feet to claw at foes or strike with a melee weapon before swooping off. Aarakokran societies are typically xenophobic and shun any contact with strangers. Caravans passing through their territory will be stopped and asked to pay a toll. Good tribes allow the merchants to pass unmolested if they pay. Evil tribes will take the bribe and attack them anyway. The one exception is the tribe that inhabits the White Mountains, which have allied themselves to the nearby city of Kern. Kern is the only city-state to welcome or provide special lodging for the birdmen to rest in. Other cities may tolerate Aarakokra, but only if they remain on foot. Any that fly overhead are assumed to be robbers that swoop down on caravans and take trade goods, and may be attacked on sight. Aarakokra live in eyries built into the highest mountains they can find. A formative part of their society is the Great Hunt. In order to become proper adults, adolescent birdmen must fly to the Sea of Silt and stalk and kill a silt drake. The entire tribe engages in combat with the drake, but only the initiates land the killing blow. Scars from the battle are a mark of pride and adulthood to the Aarakokran people. Unsurprisingly, Aarakokran priests typically become air clerics, though sun clerics are also common. Clerics will summon mighty air elementals to lead them across the Silt Sea during the Great Hunt. Psionic disciplines known to Aarakokran tribal leaders include all-around vision and radial navigation, which greatly enhances their already formidable scouting abilities. Aarakokrans are rather fragile by human standards, and will be severely injured by a sturdy blow from a human or dwarf opponent. In combat, they stay in the air, throwing spears with their powerful legs, dropping weighted nets to entrap land-based foes, and striking with brutal telepathic or telekinetic powers. Because of their ability to remain out of reach, Aarakokrans make formidable psionic warriors that can specialize in hit-and-run attacks. A small number of younger Aarakokra may feel a wanderlust, and seek to join an adventuring group. Some younger Aarakokra claim the time has finally come for their race to take a major role in world affairs. Others are motivated by simple desire to explore and seek treasure. Their flight abilities greatly enhance any party's knowledge of terrain features, and can easily spot ambuscades before they run into them. Unfortunately, all Aarakokra are claustrophobic and suffer a morale penalty in enclosed spaces like caves or ruins. Still, the ability to fly adds a very valuable skill to any adventuring party. The Thri-Kreen are a race of intelligent insect folk that inhabit the Tier lands. In their language, Kreen means people or mantis men, and they do indeed have many praying mantis-like features. The Kreen stand about 7 feet tall and are covered in a thick, chitinous exoskeleton. The chitin provides a naturally strong defense, though their unusual size and shape prohibits a mantis man from using armor. The Thri-Kreen have 6 limbs. One pair is typically used for bipedal locomotion, while the remaining 2 pairs are used as arms. Kreen muscles are located beneath the chitin, making it difficult to tell a powerful Kreen from a weak one. Kreen have superb dexterity and wisdom. Both ability scores max out at a staggering 23. Though exceptional Elves and Halflings may have stats that high, an average Kreen is always more dexterous and wise than an average specimen of any other race. One reason their wisdom is so high is that the Kreen inherit racial memories from their distant ancestors. They may have detailed knowledge of an event that took place before their birth, because it was witnessed by a relative. Uniquely, the Thri-Kreen have no need for sleep. They can continue working all through the day and night, with only short periods of sleepless rest. When considering other races, Kreen tend to view sleeping not as a biological necessity, but as a vice. It is seen as laziness, which is looked down upon as a severe weakness to the Kreen. Those Kreen that spend time with humans may become fascinated with sleep, and stare intently at their comrades as they slumber. Thri-Kreen are one of the shortest-lived intelligent races on Athas, living to an absolute maximum of 40 years. Thri-Kreen are an entirely carnivorous species. Much of their culture is centered on hunting other creatures. Their symbols, customs, and language often contain metaphors related to hunting. Even the way they think tends to be hunter-based. For instance, when the Thri-Kreen trade, an unusual occurrence as they have no interest in money, they refer to the purchaser of goods as the predator, and the seller of goods as the prey. Kreen prefer the meat of animals and have become expert at stalking wildlife in the wasteland. If they cannot find animals to eat, Kreen have little compunction about feasting on sapient creatures. This willingness to cannibalize, along with their alien mindsets, has given Kreen a bad reputation among humans. Some Kreen have well adapted to city life, like Kakikrik, the owner of a tavern specializing in Thri-Kreen cuisine, in Tyr called the Hungry Halfling. But more than a few Kreen only travel to cities in times of starvation, looking to eat a few natives. In the most extreme cases, Thri-Kreen will eat carrion or even other Thri-Kreen, though that is avoided if at all possible. Thri-Kreen society is centered around groupings known as clutches. The clutch is a group of 5 to 10 people specially bonded together. The bonds of the clutch combine those of family, friends, and teammates, for lack of a better word, though clutchmates need not be biologically related. Between clutchmates, the Kreen withhold nothing. Money, items, weapons, opinions, assistance, medical aid, all is rendered to the group first before the individual is considered. In unusual circumstances, Thri-Kreen will form a clutch with non-Kreen humanoids, such as may be found in an adventuring party. Between mantis men, the clutch is offered and accepted by a mutual exchange of pheromones. This is unrecognizable to humanoids, so it may be verbally stated instead. Joining a clutch is an instinctual need on a biological level for the Kreen. Those that find themselves isolated in the Tier lands with no access to other Kreen will by necessity join non-Kreen in a clutch. A Kreen that is without clutchmates for a prolonged period may display psychological problems. Sometimes non-Kreen may misunderstand how a clutch is expected to function. It's more than just a comrade in an adventuring party. Typically, a clutch bond is made for life. Total loyalty is expected between clutchmates, though if a Kreen decides he has mistakenly taken a clutchmate that cannot or will not fulfill their requirements, he can rescind that status with no ill will intended. Multiple clutches of Thri-Kreen will join together into a pack. The pack is not as formal and intimate as is a clutch, and generally involves a mutual necessity for hunting or raiding. Next and last among Thri-Kreen society is the nation. No Kreen nations exist in the Tier lands, so information about them is tentative at best. Kreen nations are made up of a huge assemblage of packs. Kreen of different nations owe each other no allegiance and may compete for resources and fight each other as two human nations would. Thri-Kreen make excellent additions to an adventuring party. They are skilled in combat, tend towards powerful psionic abilities, need little water, are unbothered by heat and dryness, and can guard the camp all night because of their lack of sleep. The oneness with nature in the desert alongside constant practice at hunting make Thri-Kreen excellent rangers. The Thri-Kreen are able to use their access to racial memories to become highly skilled combatants without any real formal training. Two specialist weapons are usable only by the Thri-Kreen. One is the Chatk'tha, a three-bladed throwing wedge that embedded racial memories explain to them how to use. The other is the Githka, a polearm with a three-bladed head on either side of the shaft. Even without weapons, Thri-Kreen are naturally armed with sharp claws and a powerful bite with their mandibles. On the negative side of things, Kreen cannot, even if they wished to, use arcane magic. Their existence in the Blue Age before the discovery of sorcery probably prevents them from learning it. Kreen society rejects arcane magic on a philosophical basis as well. Even evil Thri-Kreen will not willingly despoil or destroy the ecosystem. Thri-Kreen cannot swim and are generally nervous around deep pools of water or silt. Their hyper-adaptation to the dryness of the desert has created a corresponding weakness to humid climates. Too much time in a jungle or other wet place can lead to disease or lung ailments. Thri-Kreen will have an especially difficult time getting along with elven party members. The two races are viciously at odds with one another, mainly because the Kreen so often hunt and kill elves. They think elf flesh is a delicacy, and often have trouble controlling themselves when they have the opportunity to eat an elf. Are the Thri-Kreen meant to inherit the earth? They are hardy and perfectly adapted to the wasteland. Though it is often overlooked in histories of humanoids, the Kreen were present all the way back in the Blue Age alongside the Halflings. They were a primitive race then and could not flourish on the mostly water-based planet. The Kreen do not consider the subsequent Green and what they call the current Brown Age as tragedies. If anything, the ruin of Athas has allowed them to flourish as a species. On other worlds, such as Faerun or Orth, Kreen are a minor, almost forgotten race. On Athas, they are one of the dominant peoples and perhaps the strongest single group on the planet. The ferocious heat means nothing to them, and they require as little as 1 gallon of water per week. Much of what the rest of the peoples under the Dark Sun call wasteland is perfectly suited to the Mantis Men. Beyond the jagged cliffs in the far north, past the Tier lands, true nations of Kreen have recently been discovered. Entire cities of 10,000 inhabitants or more, such as Thathalor, have been built by the Mantis Men. The buildings are towering hive-like structures built from sand and the amber-like secretions of a giant snail species bred for this purpose. Beyond the 3 known nations of Kreen, there are rumors of a true empire, which would dwarf any of the city-states of the Tier lands. The Emperor of the Kreen is known as the Lord of Change, and supposedly has psionic powers far beyond anything even the Sorcerer-Kings possess. What role this empire will play in the life of the Tier lands is unknown. If the rumors about their size and radical augmentations to baseline Kreen are true, they pose a mortal threat to everyone in the Tier lands. In the aftermath of Rajat's imprisonment, the Sorcerer-Kings turned on one another due to their inherently evil natures. Each sought ultimate dominion over all of the Tier lands. They also struggled to build and maintain their great cities, when so many frail humans were dying from overwork and heat. The Dragon Kings began to magically experiment on their subjects to craft the ultimate slave/soldier. 2 new races were the result of these experiments: half-dwarves and half-giants. Half-dwarves, also known as Muls or Mules, are the offspring of a human and a dwarf. Humans and dwarves typically do not interbreed. Muls are difficult to conceive, and most are created through forced breeding programs by slave masters. If conception does occur, the child takes 12 long months to bring to term, and often kills the mother during the birthing process. Despite the challenges of creating a Mul, the rewards outstrip any petty concerns for the life of a mere slave. Muls inherit the adaptability of their human parent and the toughness of their dwarven parent. Strangely, Muls are not halfway between their two parents in height. Rather, an unusual gigantism lets them reach a height of around 7 feet. Muls are immediately recognizable by their pointed ears and complete lack of body hair. Muls are immaculate physical specimens, with chiseled muscles, broad shoulders, strong necks, and powerful legs. Half-dwarves have rough-hewn dwarven features with large noses, square jaws, and heavy brow ridges. Muls typically possess above-average strength and always possess heroic constitution. A Mul's indefatigable nature has become legendary. They can perform tasks for an incredibly long time with very little food or water. Half-dwarves can perform the heaviest physical labor, like stone quarrying for a full day and a half at least before needing to stop. Even after extreme physical exertion in battle, a Mul will remain tireless, allowing them to easily overpower their human or dwarf enemies that have long since succumbed to fatigue. This mighty energy is why Muls are prized as slaves. A team of 24 Muls is worth several hundred humans. Because of their size and strength, quite a few Muls are sent to fight as gladiators in the arena. Almost all Muls are born into slavery, a dark origin that is often reflected in their personalities. Muls tend to have grim attitudes and may be quick to violence and argument. Muls do not often seek out the company of others, either as friends or traveling companions. They live out their lives of servitude and hatred and spite. Bitter misanthropy is a common trait of Muls, whether slave or free. Some have developed an extreme mercenary lifestyle, never trusting anyone or offering aid without some sort of immediate reward promised. The harshness of their childhoods has led them to think of themselves and only themselves. All Muls are sterile and can never breed with humans, dwarves, or other Muls. This has stopped them from creating a true culture of their own, aside from a fondness for tattoos in the style of dwarven runes. A Mul knows that his line ends with him, and the only way to make more of his people is by the brutal force of slavery. In the deep desert, some Muls have formed communities of their own kind that have escaped slavery. The ex-slaves may seek to liberate Mul slaves wherever they are found, or simply act as vicious raiders that strike back at a society that kept them in bondage. In any society of ex-slaves, Muls are often found in leadership roles because of their great strength and willpower. Almost every Mul you encounter will either be a slave or one who has somehow escaped slavery. All of them have a story and probably a grudge about how they ended up where they are. Some are choked with bile about their former lives, others are just happy to have survived. Convincing one to become a comrade on a quest is difficult because of their loner natures. But if you have a Mul learn to trust you, which doesn't come quickly or easily, you'll have a friend for life. Muls make excellent additions to an adventuring party. They are extremely hardy and fight with years of experience of labor in the slave pits. There is little suffering that a Mul has not already endured. Muls are a practical, hard-headed people and are not prone to fear or flight. Muls that were gladiators know a host of brutal fighting techniques that will serve them well in a scrap. Half-dwarves are the solid, steady workhorses of the party, the backbone in combat that stiffens everyone else and prevents them from being overrun before the mages or psionicists can use their spells. Despite their role as slaves, the Muls have done more to change Athas than any other race. When one of the Sorcerer-Kings himself, Kalak, was slain by 2 Mul slaves, Neva and Rikus. Half-giants are enormous humanoids, standing 12 feet tall and weighing up to 1,600 pounds. Their faces have huge, exaggerated features, with large noses, ears, or brow ridges. Half-giants have fearsome strength and can easily crush smaller creatures with their fists and feet alone. Their skin can be of any human color, but tends towards dusky or copper-toned. Half-giants usually, but not always, have below-average intelligence by human standards. Among urbanites, they have garnered a reputation, not entirely unearned, for gullibility or brutish behavior. Roguish humanoids have been known to take advantage of a half-giant's slow-witted nature, though if the Goliath realizes he's been tricked, he can easily crush the prospective con-man. A half-giant is commonly used for extra muscle in taverns, a high-prestige bodyguard for merchants or nobles, and especially intimidating guards at city gates. There is no natural way for a human to procreate with a giant. They were originally created by magical experiments for use as slaves. Yet unlike the Mull, half-giants may mate with others of their own kind, allowing them a measure of society outside of the control of slave masters or sorcerers. Half-giant communities tend to mimic the general practices of nearby settlements, rather than invent their own. Half-giants are temperamentally more similar to their human than their giantish lineage. The vicious wanton cruelty with no hint of moral sentiment, common in most giant races, is absent. Half-giants have no more likelihood to be evil than an average human does. They tend to absorb whatever culture they are introduced to and generally are eager to please in order to be part of a group. A half-giant will gladly work with a party of good-aligned adventurers on a noble quest, just as easily as he will join a vicious gang of street thugs looking to rob and murder. All that matters to their simple minds is that they have a group of friends to belong to. Half-giants have a malleable alignment. Part of it, the lawful neutral chaotic, or the good neutral evil side, is chosen to remain static at character creation. The other part shifts each day based on the giant's whim or the effect a charismatic figure has on him. The half-giants were born after the end of the Cleansing Wars. They have no ancient legends or racial histories to fall back on. In the deserts, half-giants may create a primitive village society of their own, but it extends little beyond simple raiding, hunting, and dueling with their own kind. Occasionally, the half-giants may seek out a neutral druid or cleric to arbitrate a dispute, or guide them on a complex issue. Designed to be the ultimate soldier in their struggle for supremacy, the half-giants were set against the towering walls of rival city-states. The magical craft of their creation quickly spread, and soon every king was racing to produce the half-giants. Their presence in every army quickly nullified their shock effect, and returned the equilibrium between states. Today, half-giants live mostly in the city-states as slaves, gladiators, or laborers. Half-giants are given tasks that require their epic strength, like lifting the titanic stone blocks used to build ziggurats and city walls. Half-giants must always contend with a world that is too small for them. Everything from clothing to weapons and armor to doorways to beds are just not built for someone their size. Half-giants must camp outside an inn without their comrades because they can't fit in the rooms. All personal items the half-giant uses cost double, because they must be specially crafted with extra material. Because of their colossal strength, half-giants are best as fighters, barbarians, or gladiators. They tend to be too ungainly and noticeable to become rogues.
You too big to be a thief.
Half-giant fighters are frightening to behold on the battlefield. They can easily crush an unarmored humanoid with their bare fists. Blows from most weapons will do little damage to their rough flesh. Half-giants enjoy carrying Herculean clubs, studded with obsidian that can pulverize multiple foes in one strike. With enough money to contract a blacksmith to make half-giant-sized heavy armor, the Goliaths become unstoppable colossi against all but the largest foes. All half-giants begin the game with double the number of hit points they rolled. Their mighty strength makes doors, bars, and gates a trivial obstacle they can smash through with ease. Half-giants are good to have around if you prefer the direct approach to problems. Half-giants do not practice arcane magic, and only very unusual specimens may become clerics or psionicists. The greatest problem that half-giants must face is how much it takes to feed them and slake their thirst. Great drafts of water and huge joints of meat must be consumed for these titans to avoid going hungry. Not always easy to do if you're out in the middle of the desert looking through some ruins. And a hungry half-giant looming over you is not something you want to see. It is also difficult to effectively remain hidden when a lumbering 1,600-pound beast is following you around. Only careful role-playing will prevent a half-giant giving away your position, burning through all of your provisions, and carelessly destroying a priceless artifact you meant to sell. Despite their limitations, half-giants can become exciting characters. Like any creature born into slavery, they have experienced the very worst Athasian society has to offer. Yet their simplistic minds and open hearts can make it easy for them to drop everything and join a party of adventurers. They may not understand the tricky nuances of why they are fighting. It's important to decide what exactly motivates half-giant characters rather than just playing them as empty-headed bruisers. Perhaps they are trying to find kinship after being beaten and nearly killed as a slave. Maybe they are out for revenge against the people that tried to kill his family in the gladiatorial arena. Maybe he wants to understand the mysteries of nature after a lifetime in the cities. They have personalities, feelings, and beliefs, however crudely expressed, that can make these heroes just as complex as anyone else. There are few races more distinctly Athasian than the bastard half-breeds. They were created artificially by the whim of sorcerer-kings and conditioned for a life of slavery and exploitation. Working out their attitudes towards their companions is a rewarding process that will teach the player more about how Athas actually functions. Muls and half-giants are living examples of the sorcerer-kings bending the laws of nature to better pillage the environment. Their life transformed into a commodity in order to be consumed and discarded. Creatures that were beaten into a specific shape in order to better survive the wasteland the sorcerers created. But what will the God Kings do if they refuse to be consumed, refuse the system, and try to destroy their creator? Because of the purging of other sapient species during the Cleansing Wars, humanity remains the largest race left on Athas. They make up the majority of the population in all city-states. All sorcerer kings were once human, the Templars are human, the aristocracies and richest merchants are mostly human. Humanity's place as the master people during Rajat's crusade has left them in charge of the dominant class of society. Yet that position has not prevented the majority of the human population sinking to the lowest of the low. Though a fraction are positioned at the top of the heap, humans are just as likely to be miserable drudges and slaves as any other race. The degradation that magic has wrought on the world has twisted the human form to some degree. Compared to humans on other prime material worlds, Athasian humanity is oddly distorted. Their facial features may look oddly feral, or have unnatural-looking eyes, pointed ears, unusually long or stunted limbs. The Athasian heat has given most humans a darker or bronzed skin tone. Ironically, after the Cleansing Wars, the deficit of population has forced considerable racial diversity among the cities. Many more humans are living alongside elves, dwarves, giants, halflings, and other exotic peoples than they ever did in the Green Age. Most humans still exhibit a lingering bigotry against any other race. Non-humans are more easily reduced to the level of non-persons that can be exploited and destroyed for labor or amusement. The death of Rajat put an end to the mass killing, but in its wake came a regime of oppression and cruelty. If Rajat was a chaotic evil dictator and murderer, then his lieutenants are neutral evil egotists. The nations they have crafted are microcosms of the defiling art, treating everyone and everything as their personal property to be drained of value until death, in a form of megalomaniacal, world-destroying selfishness. The Age of the Sorcerer-Kings, also called the Brown Age, is a severe regression from the level of pre-war human civilization. Millennia of rapacious exploitation and war have utterly exhausted Athas's natural resources. Metal, that most vital component of armor and weaponry, is extremely scarce. Only the wealthy and powerful have iron axes or steel longswords. The soldiers of the God Kings are naturally accoutred with the very finest metal arms, giving them an almost insurmountable advantage over the masses of semi-clad serfs. Even crafting arrows for ranged weapons can be challenging because of the scarcity of wood. Rajat and his crusade pushed Athas back almost into the Stone Age. Replacements for metal weapons come in an extraordinary amount of different styles and materials. Two-handed clubs called maquitals are made by embedding sharpened pieces of obsidian along the length of a wooden shaft. The weapon is so strong and sharp it is said to be able to decapitate a crodlu with one swing. Athasians by necessity must use every scrap of resource they can find. Animal bone can be sharpened and attached with glue or vines to a shaft made of horn to create a crude polearm. Leather can be used to fashion a sling to hurl stones, if no other weapon is available. Some armies have such decrepit smithing abilities they resort to stone axe or mace heads. Weapons have a brutish or savage appearance. Under the dark sun, every single piece of a creature down to its bone and marrow has become a commodity that others need to exploit to survive. These brutish Stone Age weapons can be deadly to bare flesh, but burst apart on plate or chain armor. It may behoove party members to learn how to repair or craft these easily destructible weapons. Weapon durability adds an extra layer of challenge and complexity to a campaign that never fails to remind players how perilous life is under the dark sun. Athasian heroes need to possess natural talents that can serve them even when weapons fail. the great strength of a Mull or a half-giant. The speed of an elf, the claws and teeth of a Thri-Kreen are all just as deadly as steel. The lost arts of punching, grappling, and wrestling are keenly practiced in Athasian arenas. The banning of wearing weapons or armor by officious Templars can mean that your body is the only thing you have left to fight with. On Athas, it is likely that heroes will have to learn the answer to the riddle of steel.
Steel isn't strong, boy. Flesh is stronger.
The hero makes the weapons don't make the hero. The lack of metal has also severely hampered commerce and industry. Without metal tools, smithing becomes difficult or impossible. Pack animals cannot be shod with metal shoes to protect their feet from the scorching sands. Worst of all is that farm implements made of bone or stone are much harder to use than ones made of bronze or iron. Even the currency on Athas has a primitive quality about it. Metal, even soft metals like gold, are too precious to be used as coins. Most Athasians that don't simply barter for goods use coins made from pieces of ceramic. The low technology base also fuels the slave trade. Force is the only way to persuade people to perform the nightmarish labor with bare hands and bone tools. Clothing on Athas is made to function in the burning daytime sun. In other words, there is very little of it. Both men and women tend to be only barely clad with a light loincloth or slender robe. Anything heavier is an invitation to heatstroke, leaving you unconscious in minutes. Athasians have learned to be comfortable showing more skin than on other more prudish worlds. Defensive gear tends to be as limited as the clothing most heat-stroked Athasians wear. Leather armor, gambesons, and other simple material are the most common. Athasian craftsmen have taken the challenge of providing armor in a metal-free world with great ingenuity. The carapace of giant insects is especially prized for its ability to be worked into shape, yet retain its tensile strength. Heavier armors can be made from the thick bones of dead megafauna from the desert. Athasian armor has incredible variety in appearance, based on the sheer number of different animals and insect species that go into its crafting. Traditional metal armor does still exist. Tyr especially is known to have a few remaining precious reserves of iron. The mines would have been considered too exhausted to be used in the Green Age, but now they are a treasure trove of scarce metal. Receiving a suit of iron chainmail is a blessing to a warrior on Athas. Wearing this armor in the blazing heat is another matter. It may not be practical to use metal armor even if it is acquired because of the potential for fainting. Water loss can kill in the Athasian heat, so it may be better to use the leather or chitinous armor that other Athasians prefer. The most intriguing thing about the Dark Sun setting is how it shifts from the traditional time frame of Dungeons & Dragons. Most D&D games are set in an equivalent to medieval Europe, between roughly AD 500 and AD 1500. The Dark Sun is clearly based on the Middle East of roughly 2000 BC. For a modern person, there may not be much difference between 1000 years ago and 3000, but historically speaking, these were vastly different time periods. By the Middle Ages, there were societal structures, economies, and attitudes that we might just barely recognize today. The languages we speak, religions we follow, and in many cases countries we inhabit, are all descendants or based on the descendants of medieval European feudal states that most RPGs are based on. The Dark Sun more closely resembles the earliest civilizations known to history, the Mesopotamian cultures of Babylon, Sumeria, Assyria, and the Hittites in particular, along with a smattering of ancient Egypt, early African cultures, and imperial-era Aztec culture. Though obviously different in form and location, these early pre-medieval societies shared many similar characteristics. From the earliest pharaoh to Alexander the Great, the ancients were ruled by kings that portrayed themselves as literally divine. Most of these societies advertised that marriage of temporal with supernatural authority by building megalithic structures like pyramids or ziggurats. All of these cultures relied on slave gangs working in the murderous heat. Most, except for the Aztecs, were only just beginning to create tools and weapons out of metal. Writing was just beginning to be introduced at a very basic level. The ancient societies that form the basis of Athas are in some ways more honest about life in the past than medievalist fantasy. That type of fantasy, created by scholars of the Middle Ages like J.R.R. Tolkien, was centered in the Victorian romanticism surrounding the medieval era. The Dark Sun is a world stripped of all but the ugly side of the past. Slavery or forced labor of some sort was endemic until very recently. Kings were not noble heroes to worship, they were no better than tyrants that oppressed everyone. Much like on Athas, sorcerers in the ancient world were not seen as kooky hedge wizards with pointy hats. They were hated as literally demonic entities that one could not suffer to live. The truly ancient past of the scorching Middle Eastern or North African desert is mentioned in passing in the Dungeon Master's Guide, but most D&D works like Faerun, Ravenloft, Greyhawk, Eberron, and others take place firmly in the medieval era. The Dark Sun breathes fresh life into any role-playing experience by pushing the stage further back. Even purely on an aesthetic level, the sandstorms, oases, caravans, pyramids, and slave gangs add an oriental spice to the stale, overused landscape of medieval Europe. Pushing the Dark Sun's setting into the ancient past puts emphasis on just how savagely the land has been treated. The powers that be, like the two great warrior tribes mentioned in the introduction of the Road Warrior, fought until there was nothing left to fight with. Perhaps if nothing changes in the Tier Lands, the Sorcerer-Kings will be left reigning over kingdoms of cavemen, living in decaying ruins of past glories. It has been said that the Fourth World War will be fought with sticks and stones. On the post-apocalyptic planet of Athas, sticks and stones are all people have left. Professional adventurers follow many of the same classes found on other worlds. Fighters still dominate martial practices. Rangers slay with arrows and learn how to track and hunt. Rogues perform the same lockpicking, sneaking, and general skullduggery as anywhere. But significant exceptions exist that have shifted Athasian roles into a unique shape in some areas. First up are the Gladiators. To distract themselves from their daily struggles, the masses of the great city-states crowd huge amphitheaters and watch vicious blood sports. The combatants in these violent arenas are known as gladiators, and they have come to represent a unique character class for Athasian adventurers. Gladiators are ferocious melee combatants that continually train in the arenas of their hometown. Some are slaves forced to perform to stave off execution. Others are glory seekers trying to win wealth and fame. Because of their constant training, gladiators have immediate proficiency with any weapon, even if they've never used one before, and their bodies are sculpted into well-muscled perfection. They also learn to customize their armor to make it more form-fitting and protective. Gladiators are especially good at unarmed combat and wrestling, skills that come in handy if you are stripped of your weapons for some reason, or need to capture rather than kill an opponent. Most gladiators learn how to use dirty tricks and below-the-belt strikes to gain an extra edge in battle. Nothing is too underhanded and nothing is too cruel to survive the slave pits. Gladiators may learn a number of other specialized skills outside of the norm for fighters. Frequent battles against beasts lead some gladiators to learn how to tame, train, and fight alongside wild creatures. The trait that most defines the gladiator as its own class next to fighters is the performance-based nature of an arena. Successful gladiators need more than a strong arm to avoid the frequent culling in the slave pits. They need a shining charisma. Gladiators learn to harness the joy of being watched in combat to accentuate their techniques. The gladiators are spurred on to greater feats of violence when they know they have witnesses to their epic battle skills.
Only that the crowd would be there to greet him with howls of lust and fury.
Gladiators also excel at taunting opponents into melee or enraging them so they rush headlong into battle without thinking. Some gladiators are such consummate performers they even take the path of the jast dancer. Jast dancers specialize in toying with their foes while exercising graceful, poetic movements to avoid damage. They learn to inflict extremely painful wounds while maintaining agile movement over extremely difficult terrain. Gladiators eventually become expert at spotting weaknesses and reacting to sudden violence, even from ferocious monsters. Fear does not come easily to a slave that must fight for its life on a daily basis. Whether by their own will or through slavery, they have learned to make violence into an art. They've learned to specialize in the cruelty and slaughter needed to survive each day under the red sun. But even in the blood-drenched sand of the slave pits, they show the potential for great feats of heroism. Like Spartacus and his slave army, the ruling classes may find themselves suddenly beset by a mortal threat of their own making. Their bodies and even their lives exist merely to be consumed by the powerful. But the arena is the one place to prove what does not kill you makes you stronger. Gladiators inhabit one of the few roles of inspirational heroism in an otherwise savage land. The raucous crowd baying for blood may turn against their tyrannical overlords through the awe-inspiring proof that the most degraded slave can reach Olympian heights of glory through battle. Gladiators are molded into living weapons by the societies they inhabit. but that weapon can be turned against the Sorcerer-Kings and used for good. The one force that has sculpted the modern form of Athas more than anything else is arcane magic. Magic is known to virtually every other world in a far more benign shape. Wizards may be mistrusted and misunderstood, or hold a well-regarded role in the upper echelons of society. Under the dark sun, the crimes of the Sorcerer-Kings burn the souls of every mortal who feels the harsh light and flaying winds all around them. Every wizard is seen as one with the vile dragons and provokes nothing but ignorant fury in the Tierlands. On Athas, the sorcerer is as reviled as a witch is to an inquisitor. At best, the gentlest souls will shun a wizard and eject them from the community. Most sorcerers that are discovered will be immediately attacked and murdered by a mob of enraged citizenry. It is imperative that any magic user keep their spell knowledge a closely guarded secret. The Sorcerer-Kings are also vicious towards rival wizards, and give standing orders to his Templars to kill or imprison any they find. Magic under the Dark Sun has long since been divided into two unique forms, preserving and defiling. Magical power on other worlds is drawn through an omnipresent force known as the Weave, because of Athas's unique cosmological isolation, which locks it off from various other planes of existence. The only means to power spells is by drawing energy out of living creatures. All life on Athas, animal and plant, has some measure of vital force giving them the ability to live. This energy is ultimately descended from the sun, transmitted to plants and then onto animals that eat plants or other animals. The mage learns to extract this energy, store it in their body, and release it when they need to give motive force to a spell. Until epic levels are reached and the mage has transformed into a dragon or a Vangeon, magic power can only be drained from plant life. Though both types of mage pull life force from vegetation, they do it in vastly different ways. Preservers remove energy slowly, carefully, and without damaging the plants. They are like a bird that drains nectar, but leaves the flower intact so it can blossom again. The energy removal is a slow, delicate process, and they take just enough power for the spells they plan to cast, no more. Energy transferred to the Preserver is partially sent back to the plants to prevent them from harm. Defilers wreck and destroy when they take power. They brutally tear out the vital force to drain as much power as possible, even more than they can truly use at the time. The plants and even the nutrient-rich soil holding the plants is turned into useless ash. Especially powerful defilers can lay waste to a huge amount of densely packed vegetation, creating miles of barren desert. The ruined land does not even provide the usual waste matter that can be used to refertilize the soil and grow more food. The energy is lost forever. The rewards for defiling are high for the individual and miserable for everyone else. Defilers level up faster, memorize spells faster each day, potentially gain extra magic energy, and all with much less effort on their part. It's the quick and dirty path to magical might. The draining process for defilers is a gluttonous, vampiric tearing away of what rightfully belongs to everyone. The mere act of wrecking the ecosystem becomes an end unto itself, because of the almost narcotic rush of power it gives them. In order to study magic, a prospective spellslinger will have to find a tutor. There are no magic academies on Athas. Discovering a master to train under could easily result in denunciation to the Templars, followed by a quick execution. Most wannabe students are guided by a relative in a family that has long practiced wizardry. Without such an intimate guide to the arcane, a mage will need to investigate any rumors of magical practice, and find an elder magic user on their own. Defilers are by nature egotists with greed and power lust foremost in their thoughts, making it difficult to exert the care for others needed by a teacher for a pupil. Those looking to learn the art of defiling may be able to find assistance in the highest powers of the city-states. The Sorcerer-Kings will train small cadres of defilers to do their bidding. Aspiring defilers thus have a set path to gain magical training from the acolytes of the greatest wizards on Athas. These coveted positions of king's student/agent can be quite rewarding, but are often lethal. Even if the god kings develop your skills in the dark arts, they closely watch the defilers for signs of potential rebellion. If one of their underlings becomes too skilled in arcane magic, they will slay them in a jealous, fearful rage. Preservers, on the other hand, have a ready-made organization to learn from, the Veiled Alliance. The Veiled Alliance is a secret society present in all city-states dedicated to teaching preserving magic and opposing all defilers, especially the Sorcerer-Kings. Naturally, such an organization is hunted by the Templars and the ruler's defiler agents. Any nest of Alliance members is crushed if discovered. Rising through the ranks by gaining the trust of the other members will gradually allow access to higher spells. The Alliance is one of the few places a preserver can find spell components, scrolls, and all the accoutrements of spellcasting in the cities. Though dedicated to good, the Alliance is also ruthless about enforcing its secrecy. If you are even suspected of revealing its presence or its members to the authorities, they will not hesitate to hunt and kill you no matter where you run. The two branches of magic are further subdivided into 3 sub-branches, the so-called Path Sinister, Path Dexter, and Neutral Path. The Sinister or left-handed path involves conjuration and necromancy, considered to be somewhat more evil-aligned, while the Dexter or right-handed path involves the more subtle and protective branches of divination and abjuration. Everything else is on the neutral middle path. Preservers and defilers may use spells from the opposite path, but there is a 15% failure penalty when trying to learn those spells. Preservers may, in an emergency, drain magic through defiling once per experience level. If they do this a second time, they run the risk of permanently losing constitution and becoming a defiler immediately. Though it is possible to revert from defiling magic to preserving, it is an arduous process, akin to a paladin restoring his lawful good status after violating his holy oath. Even if they once again officially become preservers, anyone who was once a defiler is ejected from the Veiled Alliance and never trusted again. Preservers are allotted only one chance to return to the fold. If they violate the tenets of preservation a second time, they are forever a defiler. Even the barest elements of magical lore, such as books and scrolls, are vanishingly scarce in the treeless desert. Most tomes written in the Green Age have long since turned to dust in the heat. More dangerous than the weather are the rages of magic-hating arsonists, eager to condemn anything remotely sorcerous to the flames. Spell books tend to be written on unusual materials, such as etched into clay tablets, strands of giant hair, animal hides, or carved into bone staves. These books tend to be written in a code understandable only to mages, lest they accidentally be discovered by the masses. Once a magic user has multi-classed as a psionicist and reached 20th level, they may begin to drain life energy from animals and even sapient creatures like humans. Arcane magic is the hardest path to follow in an already brutal world, but sorcery is the only way to reach the grandest transcendence of godlike power on a planet with no deities to challenge you, either as a world-destroying dragon or the angelic savior of Angion. One of the most unique and bizarre features of Athas is that it is completely unreachable by the deities of the Outer Planes. Because of a peculiar planar alignment around the world, traditional means of dimensional travel are almost impossible even to the gods. Religion of a kind may exist, but it does not pray to gods that actually answer their priests, as on other prime material worlds. Whether the gods could ever contact Athas but lost their access in the distant past, or if they were always unable to reach Athas, is unknown. In the place of worshippers of the gods like Torm or Mistra stand 3 sets of practitioners of the divine. One, already mentioned, are the Templars, the lackeys of the Sorcerer-Kings who draw their magic from the ascended dragon forms of their masters. Aside from these defiler blasphemies, are the true inheritors of the mantle of the divine, the elemental clerics and druids. Athasian clerics are able to channel energy from the inner, or elemental planes of air, earth, fire, and water. Within these inner planes, the dimensional planes of matter, dwell sentient representatives of the material substance of life, called elementals. The elementals have become enraged by the annihilation of the basic building blocks of nature. The lakes, flames, wind, and soil of the world give nourishment to these creatures. What in the Green Age was once a succulent banquet of fine cakes has become a miserable scrap of stale bread. In order to restore the once flourishing planet, the elementals in their desperation have sought mortal followers to work their will on Athas. In order to become a cleric, the aspiring priest must contact a powerful elemental and swear a sacred pact. These pacts are not to be taken lightly. An initiation spell is cast by the aspirant's master, an experienced cleric of that element who has tutored him. The novice is then enveloped in their chosen element, a grave-like covering of earth or a swirling gust of air, for instance. Communion with a powerful extraplanar elemental then occurs. If the novice is truly faithful, dedicated, and skilled enough to serve, they emerge from the ritual as a cleric endued with magical ability. If the fickle elements reject him for some reason, he dies, or is consumed ever afterward with insanity. The intensity and difficulty of the pact makes for very few elemental clerics. An organized religion with temples, holy scripture, and priestly hierarchies do not exist among the element priests. Out in the wilds there are a tiny number of elemental shrines containing precious resources like healthy soil or pure water. Special clerics guard the shrines to the death against defilers and robbers. What motivates someone to become an elemental priest varies considerably. The elements are uniformly neutral in character, and attract worshippers of all alignments, good and evil, neutral, chaotic, and lawful. A woman may pledge herself to the purifying flames to seek vengeance on raiders that torched her village. A man may be saved from dying of thirst in the deep desert by a water cleric, and swear to devote the rest of his days to restoring lakes and rivers to the sands. All of them have been touched powerfully in some way by the elemental forces of nature. Though lacking huge throngs of believers like other religions, elemental priests strive to be sources of inspiration that compel the masses to ignore the cruelties of the Sorcerer-Kings and devote themselves to nature. Breaking the pact with an elemental is extremely dangerous. For the rest of their lives, clerics must always protect, preserve, and spread the force of nature they have sworn themselves to. A minor slip in devotion may be punished with the revocation of spells for a few days or weeks. Multiple infractions or very serious transgressions will send the furious elemental patron out to immediately slay the recalcitrant priest. Among a few tiny exceptions that allow a cleric to renege on their vows and damage the natural world is when it is the only way to destroy a defiler, plotting far worse harm to nature. Each of the four elements have distinctive qualities, beliefs, and goals that are reflected in their clerics. Fire priests protect the few remaining forests because they are the fuel for the roaring infernos that once consumed miles of wood to ash. Worshippers of air despise slavery and work to oppose it in all its forms. A slave may never become an air cleric unless he frees himself from bondage. Dwarves often become priests of the earth because of their strong dedication to focus, and solid determination are a perfect fit with the endurance of earth. Earth priests wander between desert communities, teaching farmers how to create and care for new beds of soil to grow crops. Water elementals feel claustrophobic in vanishing pools and lakes under the dark sun. They charge their clerics with killing defilers that come near the few remaining water sources on Athas. They are also compelled to offer water to anyone who requires it, whether good or evil. Only those who criminally waste water may be denied its bounty. Extreme vengeance will be given if you waste water, including a curse that turns any water that passes your lips into burning sand. Clerics tend to use armor and weapons particular to their chosen element. Air priests tend to strike with ranged weapons that fly through the air like javelins, darts, and arrows. Fire priests only use weapons they can smear with oil and set ablaze. Obsidian weapons, because they were forged naturally with great heat, are also acceptable. Water clerics may use weapons and armor made only from nature like wood or bone. Earth clerics have no restrictions on weapons or armor. Powers granted to the element priests are similar to those of the divine clerics on other worlds, though each cleric receives special abilities related to their chosen element. Earth priests, for instance, may magically encase themselves in loose topsoil and regain hit points for 8 hours. Air priests learn to remove harmful toxins from the atmosphere and make it breathable again. All priests gain the ability to ignore the effects from their chosen element once per day at level 5. Fire priests may walk through flames unscathed. Earth priests can pass through stone or earth as if it were not there. All clerics learn to gate in material from their chosen element at level 7. Some especially altruistic clerics learn how to sacrifice their own hit points to absorb the damage from a defiler's aura of destruction. In the city-states, elemental priests are considered a dire threat. Like preservers, any clerics are hunted down and murdered for daring to defy the Sorcerer-Kings. Several Sorcerer-Kings claim to be gods and as such brook no religious rivals. Because of the risk to life and limb and the inherently unnatural quality of urban life, clerics are mostly absent in the city-states. Any that do reside in cities must behave like resistance fighters, covertly suborning the dictates of the monarchy. A few are bold enough to become street preachers that angrily denounce the ruin of nature. Like the dragons and Evangions, if an elemental cleric multiclasses as a psionicist and reaches 20th level, they may begin a transformation into a transcendent entity. They gain the ability to transform into a mighty elemental of their chosen pact. Each level they gain will increase their anchoring to the inner planes. Eventually at 30th level they will permanently transform into an immortal representative from the inner planes. Once firmly connected to their power center on the plane of air, earth, fire, or water, the cleric has reached truly epic powers comparable to that of the dragon. Another set of nature worshippers fighting for the rights of the elements on Athas is the Druids. Druids do not worship one particular elemental form, rather they spend their days guarding a specific area of land from defilement. They gain the abilities of the two most prominent elemental features of their chosen preserve of nature. Eventually Druids may begin to wander the land, learning what they can from nature and spreading their teachings to a disciple. At the highest levels of power, Druids may become spirits of the land, living guardians in constant communion with the world around them. Long ago, the Druids helped lead the resistance against the Defilers. After being comprehensively defeated, the Druids retreated to their secret fastness in the wilds. The Defilers followed them and baited the Druids into revealing themselves by laying waste to the precious reserves of forest or water. In a time known as the Eradication, scores of the Druids were hunted down and slain as a threat to the absolute power of the God Kings. The few remaining Druids are still to be found plotting the overthrow of the Sorcerer-Kings, biding their time and building their power for an ultimate confrontation with the forces of decay and ruin. Whether as brutal avengers of nature or gentle restorers of life, the elemental priests and druids are on the front lines of a war to save the dying land of Athas and restore its balance in the natural world. In the wake of the destructive nature of magic and the lack of gods, another supernatural force has risen to prominence on Athas. Though magic is anathema and only practiced furtively away from the public, psionics are completely normal beneath the dark sun, perhaps because of the poisonous melange of magic used by the Sorcerer-Kings, or perhaps as an evolutionary adaptation in the Deadly Wastes. Almost all life, even plant life, has some form of psionic ability. Formerly, the psionic art was left to only a small number of people, though it did exist before the Brown Age. But nowadays, everyone seems to have some sort of wild talent on Athas. These psionic wild talents give every person, no matter how lowly, a surprise single psionic ability. It isn't wise to forget the psionic potential in everyone and everything, even plants, you interact with. Psionics is drawn from the inner self through wisdom and constitution. Psionic discipline comes from the harnessing and combining of three powers: physical strength, not really muscle mass, but your ability to be consciously aware of bodily force and limitations and concentrate while enduring suffering. Mental strength, again, not necessarily the amount of intellectual capacity you have, but your ability to focus thoughts and persevere long enough to join the complex forces of the mind. And spiritual strength, your overall willpower and strength of character. The nexus, as it's called, of these three powers working in tandem allows the mind to manifest psionic ability from the person to the outside world. The innate ability one has to harness psionic talent is called the will. Will represents how much energy a character can channel through their mind before resting. When you use a psionic ability, you must harness your own inner strength, and too much use is exhausting. The formal academic study of psionics is known as the Way. Almost all city-states have schools dedicated to training promising psionicists. Conditions at these schools vary between states. Some are harsh authoritarian places like Draj, where the militant Tektuktikle zealously trains anyone with a hint of psionic talent. Others are more caring and sympathetic towards students, like in the forest city of Gulg. All schools of the Way are formally or surreptitiously controlled by the Sorcerer-Kings. In some cases to forge a better class of soldiers to further military goals, in others to keep an eye on potential threats, and in others, kings are more obscure about their motives, but perhaps they have something to do with researching powerful psionic abilities for their own purposes. In some states, all that show psionic talent are forced at a young age to attend these schools. Teaching psionics outside of officially sanctioned centers is typically illegal. Some schools are filled with jaded children of nobility who use their wealth to price out poorer students. These noble scions use their psionic training for backstabbing political games with their aristocratic rivals. It is universally forbidden to teach slaves any psionic arts. Psionics are a welcome addition to any community. The struggle for survival under the Red Sun means most people will grasp at any advantage they can find. In tribal villages where access to extra resources is limited, a powerful mindbender can spell the difference between life and extinction for an entire people. In cities, psionicists are highly prized for their arts. Among the merchant classes, most slaves on Athas are subject to some degree of mental domination by psionics. Many a berserk slave trying to kill his captors and escape has been reduced to a quivering shell of a man, and sent back to the fields by mind-bending. Ornery, tough animals like mechalotes are also kept docile through mental dominion. The scattered nature of the merchant houses requires telepaths to connect distant leaders and trade caravans in the desert. There are no racial limitations on becoming a psionicist, though it is noticeably more common among certain peoples than others. Halflings are the most receptive towards the Way. It is seen as an honorable and necessary part of their culture, especially since they lack arcane magic. Thri-Kreen are a close second. Their formidable physical abilities can be harnessed to supplement mind-bending with melee combat. Dwarves, humans, half-elves, and Muls all make excellent practitioners. Elves are usually too chaotic to practice the Way and learn it with any regularity. Half-giants are usually too stupid and malleable to focus their thoughts enough, though some half-giants with unusual wisdom have been known to combine martial skill with psionic discipline that focuses on combat to become almost unstoppable in melee. Though welcomed and seen as normal by most communities, psionicists are still subject to certain rules. Most importantly, telepaths are forbidden to spy on other people's thoughts with their powers. Dominating someone's mind and forcing them to perform a deed against their will is also forbidden. Both of these things are rather hard to prove in court, though Templars are more than willing to utilize their own psionic abilities to pry forcefully into a person's mind and tear the truth out of them. Anyone who resists the Templars or the Sorcerer King will almost certainly be subjected to telepathic interrogation. Using psionics to gull or cheat merchants is not a good idea, because powerful telepaths are hired to patrol the markets and prevent this. A secret society called the Order, made up of epic-level psionicists, is said to monitor all psionic users on Athas. They ensure a strict neutrality is maintained by mindbenders who would dare to use their skills to drastically alter Athasian society. Psionics are divided into 6 disciplines. Clairsentience is the subtle art of psychic anticipation of the future or remembrance of the past. A clairsentient makes a great detective with their ability to read a memory imprint of an item, such as who swung a sword to kill someone. Psychokinesis is the ability to manipulate the world around them with physical force. Psychokineticists are the most martial mindbenders. They have the most prominent psionic battle role by smashing enemies with mental force. Psychometabolism is another excellent fighting discipline. They can harden their skin into armor-like toughness, make their bodies tireless with a sudden rush of adrenaline, or pour their willpower into their fists until they become as tough as steel. Psychoportation is the ability to manipulate time, space, and reality to bypass almost any obstacle. Psychoportation can tear a hole in space to sneak a strike force into the heart of a fortress, without alerting any guards. Telepathy is the most common psionic art practiced on Athas. Almost every powerful person has someone who can read a person's thoughts or plant harmful suggestions in their mind. The most esoteric and unusual discipline is metapsionics, a confusing branch for high-level mindbenders, looking to expand on and experiment with the psionic art. Psionics are another one of the unique features of the Athasian landscape. For some reason or another, maybe because of Rajat's dark influence in psionics and arcane magic, or perhaps the lack of divine intervention for the sapient peoples of Athas, they have learned to develop their brain in the psychic direction. Maybe any creature without the support of the gods or magic will find their minds shifting into new and dangerous shapes. Psionics are the ultimate gateway into the transcendent abilities that other magic users, arcane and divine, share. Role-playing as a psionicist can lead an adventurer into multiple directions. Some use their powers to fortify their physical prowess, others become expert detectives that can ferret out secrets or hidden thoughts. The most belligerent mindbenders can turn their minds into explosive force as deadly on the battlefield as a cannon. Whatever their focus, a psionic adventurer is part of the strangeness that gives Athas its charm, and proves once again that life will find a way to struggle against any obstacle, even something as eschatological as the end of the world. Speaking of the end of the world, let's talk about some of the influences in the writing of the Dark Sun campaign setting. Anyone who is even casually interested in role-playing games knows of the biggest influence on the fantasy genre, The Lord of the Rings. The trilogy has exerted a titanic influence on music, film, literature, virtually every fantasy-based role-playing game, and especially video games. Much of the concepts used to this very day are direct descendants of Middle-earth's rangers, dwarves, orcs, and wizards. Though published in the 1950s, it was really in the early 1970s when a brand new generation caused the novel to surge in popularity. It remains the single most influential fantasy work of the 20th century, and it's hard to conceptualize high fantasy without J.R.R. Tolkien. But the 20th century had an alternate history of fantasy that is easy to miss next to the ubiquity of hobbits and elves. Starting in the depression-ravaged 1930s, Robert E. Howard, who was also ravaged by depression, the mental, not the economic kind, first conceived of Conan the Cimmerian. Conan was a barbaric character, grim of aspect, hater of sorcery, who spent much time brooding over gloomy hills. In the 1970s, long after Howard's death, Marvel Comics began publishing the Savage Sword of Conan. It may be hard to imagine today's Disney-ified maker of dull superhero pablum as the producers of something as hard-edged as Conan. There were no merry bands of halflings singing through green fields on a quest of ultimate good. This was a bloody world about pirates, bandits, and Lovecraftian monsters. The company got away with more risque content by classifying it as a magazine. Thus, it did not have to be approved by the Comics Code Authority. The Savage Sword of Conan was a gritty black-and-white series, featuring massively muscled barbarians, almost naked wenches with heaving bosoms, and plenty of horror and bloodshed. Its classic period from 1974 to 1984 showcased the brilliant artwork of John Buscema, Bob Larkin, and Neil Adams, among others. The 1970s was also the heyday of the legendary Frank Frazetta. His paintings of brutal warriors engaged in bloody mayhem has excited the imaginations of every generation of fantasy fans afterwards. His works depicting Conan raging with a battle axe against hordes of beasts set much of the tone for the Dark Sun. Perhaps even more influential to the Dark Sun, and certainly to Dungeons & Dragons in general, is a novel written in 1950 called The Dying Earth. The Dying Earth, written by Jack Vance, is a series of interrelated vignettes set in the distant future. In the Earth's declining years, the sky is dimly lit by a blood-red sun. Strange beasts stalk the wilds, and the few nihilistic humans that remain are aware that their planet could finally die at any moment. Magicians maintain the last remaining vestiges of technology and magic, two forces that are barely distinguishable in the future. The spells these wizards use include the ability to create artificial life, and one that D&D fans will instantly recognize, the excellent prismatic spray. In fact, the way in which magic functions in D&D by memorizing spells that you lose and must rememorize after a single use is ripped directly from The Dying Earth. The tales of The Dying Earth, originally short stories that were meshed together, are bloody and grim. Fell priests summon demons, curses turn a man's face into a mangled visage of meat and bone, decadent lords live in stately palaces indulging in the pleasures of the harem. A recurring character is an artificially created woman, who rages through life slaying any she meets, because she is cursed to see everything beautiful as ugly, and everything ugly as beautiful. Though Vance later changed the overall tone of the series, the original Dying Earth was a land of darkness and slavery, more in line with the gritty pulp novels of Conan than the later sprightly tales of hobbits and rings. The Dark Sun is a fascinating mixture of traditional swords and sorcery with the post-apocalyptic genre. Typically the genre, exemplified by the Road Warrior, Boy and His Dog, and of course the Fallout franchise, is confined to science fiction. But works like The Dying Sun and Ralph Bakshi's Wizards were able to blend together a magical kingdom with the bleakness of the end times. The most interesting thing about The Dark Sun is that it asks the question, okay, but what happens next? There's a general perception that if Sauron gains the Ring of Power, then everything is over, the end of all things, as Frodo says. But logically, it wasn't the literal end of the world. it still would have continued to exist under the rule of Sauron. What would the world of Middle-earth have been like if the Dark Lord had seized ultimate power? Curiously, the fires of industry wrecking the natural world was clearly a part of Sauron's threat to Middle-earth. And later writings in the Silmarillion suggest that Sauron intended to make himself the god king of Middle-earth after reclaiming the ring. Athas is just this sort of world, a setting where the mighty champions made really terrible dice rolls on their epic quest, and evil triumphed. But it's also a world that rejects absolute, utter failure. Athas is a world where an entire species has to get back on its feet and struggle every day against the victorious evil wrought against them. It's a story of obliteration and destruction, but crucially, it's also a story of renewal after that destruction. As long as there are men and women in the deserts willing to fight for freedom, the world stands a chance to be reborn in liberty and plenty. The Dark Sun setting made its way onto computers 3 times in the 1990s. Released in 1993 and 1995 respectively, Dark Sun Shattered Lands and Dark Sun Wake of the Ravager were role-playing games created by Strategic Simulations, or SSI, the makers of the famous Gold Box series. They attempted to branch out in the mid-1990s with a new style and new gameplay elements for both the Dark Sun and Ravenloft. Unfortunately, SSI's games fell far in quality after their heyday with the legendary Pool of Radiance and Curse of the Azure Bonds. The story in those Gold Box games was minimal at best and fairly generic when it did appear. The rich choices, characters, and dialogue that we tend to equate with excellent role-playing games didn't really exist yet, although they did have amazing combat systems, and that's where you would spend an enormous amount of the game. The Dark Sun games were a tentative step for the D&D license to become more mature and story-focused several years before Baldur's Gate. Unfortunately, the results were somewhat underwhelming. Notably, both games tend to overexert the talking to the point where the game is practically a point-and-click adventure at times. Not that you couldn't choose to follow a violent path, but combat was poorly implemented. Fighting is best avoided, similar to Planescape Torment, because it's just too damn dangerous. Even stronger characters are going to be pummeled into the dirt by random street thugs if they wander down the wrong alleyway. The interface, though praised at the time for some reason, also has a certain clunkiness common to games of that era. Despite those flaws, both games are well worth playing for an authentic Dark Sun experience. The story is a well-told adventure about uniting free villages to resist the tyrannical Sorcerer King of Drage. The second game of the series, Wake of the Ravager, continues the story, when your adventurers join forces with the Veiled Alliance to stop a dragon from seizing control of Tyr. The games feature multiple ways to complete a quest, usually a brute force style contrasted with a more subtle approach. The dialogue is not quite up to the standard of the later Baldur's Gate games, but is an astounding leap from the minuscule character interaction in the Gold Box series. Both games are important steps towards having a real conversation with NPCs. The atmosphere is the most fully realized part of the game. You really do feel like you are a miserable wretch. You start the first game as a slave forced to fight in the gladiatorial arenas, wandering the deserts of Athas. The games were released on GOG.com a few years ago and regularly go on sale for under $5. Quite a bargain for 2 well-made trips to the deserts of Athas. The Dark Sun was also made into an MMORPG in 1996 called Crimson Sands. I was never able to play this game myself, but from what I've read, it was an interesting concept that never really got off the ground. This was in the early days of Memorpagas, just a few years after the original Neverwinter Nights, massively multiplayer game, and the genre hadn't really found its legs yet. The game's servers closed just 2 years after the game was originally released. Tragically, just as CRPGs were entering a golden age in the late 90s, the Dark Sun was close to being abandoned in the shift to the next edition of D&D. A number of attempts were made with varying degrees of success to make a Dark Sun module using the Neverwinter Nights toolkit. Unfortunately, most of the projects were ultimately discontinued. The projects are still readily available to view on neverwintervault.org if you're interested in seeing how close people came to a working Dark Sun module. The future of the Dark Sun video games seems limited to those homebrew titles. As good as independently produced games can be, I think it's time for Dark Sun to be in the hands of a AAA developer. Back in 2015, the wildly popular Fallout 4 became one of the best-selling games of all time. One of the brilliant features added in a later patch was survival mode. Building on indie mods for Fallout 3, it was clear fans wanted to experience a realistic wasteland, one with all the dirtiness, disease, hunger, and thirst you would expect in an irradiated hellscape. Dark Sun could easily be marketed as a potent mixture of Skyrim's medieval fantasy and Fallout's post-apocalyptic grittiness. There is ample proof that gamers want brutal medieval combat in grimdark, end-of-the-world landscapes, if only an enterprising, dedicated producer comes along to fight for it. As the 90s drew to a close, the 3rd edition of Dungeons & Dragons was released, signaling a major change for the franchise. Many of the great campaign worlds created during 2nd edition, including Planescape and Dark Sun, were discontinued. Aside from a few mentions in D&D magazines, most published materials moved on from Athas. A brief update to the world for 3rd edition was written by David Noonan for Dungeon Magazine, and there was very little else. That didn't stop fans from creating specialist rule sets to use in subsequent editions. Linked below is the website athas.org, where you'll find a full set of fan-made conversions for the series for 3.5 edition. The website is a regularly updated treasure trove of Dark Sun material, fan-made adventures, and an excellent podcast called Bones, Stone, and Obsidian. The amount of effort that went into converting the series for more modern RPGs is extraordinary, and well worth looking into. It's probably a better alternative than the older 2nd edition rule set for newer converts to D&D. The Dark Sun did return briefly to the published materials of D&D for the 4th edition. D&D 4th edition was ill-fated and not well received by a significant number of RPG fans. The Dark Sun material altered the backstory quite a bit and only alluded to the ancient events of the Blue Age. Only a scant few books were published for 4th edition Dark Sun, and soon it slipped back into memory. In the current 5th edition of D&D, there have been plenty of hints, rumors, and promises from the game's publishers that the Dark Sun would be coming back. But so far, nothing concrete has been established. Perhaps Wizards of the Coast doesn't think fans, especially the influx of brand new players of D&D, in the past decade are going to want such a grimdark setting on a hopeless, dying world. But Dark Sun was never really about how devastated or evil the world of Athas had become. It was about the kinds of heroes that world would produce. Specifically how you as a player were going to define heroism when evil had already triumphed. Putting aside the combat, the world building, the monsters, the fantasy plot lines, the magic, a role-playing game is centrally about just what it says, creating and playing a role. You get the chance to interact with other people in a living story through collective creativity. What are your characters' motivations to risk their life every day? To endure the misery of travel in a waterless desert? To strive to reorient all of Athasian government, culture, and economy away from exploitation of land and people into something good? Or what personal tragedies saw them forsake morality and pursue the road of ravaging evil? Taking the hard road of resistance to the norms of everyday life to change yourself, your city, and your world is what an adventure is all about. In the more traditional campaign worlds of D&D, as dark as they could get sometimes, it was still a much more pleasant place to be. True deities of goodness stood afar in the cosmos to intervene in mortal affairs. Most people could at least aspire to be good, and be comforted by the possibility of change for the better. While not necessarily lighthearted, the worlds of Faerun or Greyhawk or even Planescape had a more wry comic edge about them at times. The Dark Sun never pulled any punches about how grievous the suffering was for the common man. Even the Paladin class, defined as being a shining, holy embodiment of all that was good and noble, was transformed into the Templar, a vile flunky of the powers that be who uses his mixture of martial and divine skills for oppression and murder. Athas didn't shy away from the brutality and seeming impossibility of bringing change to a world ruled by godlike dragon kings. There are no other campaign settings that are as relentlessly punishing and cold towards the inherent concepts of justice, hope, and comradeship. How could any of these things possibly exist if the world itself is dying? The Sorcerer-Kings desolated the planet until it was a vast, scorching desert. But worse than that, in the new world they created, everyone was forced to adapt to life in the pitiless, waterless wasteland by becoming just as self-centered, bloodthirsty, and greedy as the Sorcerer-Kings themselves. In most campaign settings, evildoers are a small collective of reviled outsiders, trying to overthrow a just world. But on Athas, you do the opposite. The good guys are a pitiful minority, trying to overturn an otherwise wicked culture. There is even some reason to believe that even if evil is finally defeated on Athas, the slaves are freed and the Sorcerer-Kings destroyed, there still isn't any hope left. The planet is ultimately doomed to perish after thousands of years of abuse and neglect. Where does being a hero or adventurer start? Why do they persist at going against the odds when they are stacked so high? Dark Sun is a cruel, bitter, and bloody background to roleplay against, but it's also the best campaign for a player to write about how exceptional individuals craft that thin line of moral behavior that can change the fate of worlds. Fortunately, Athas has not been lost to the windswept deserts never to be heard from again. The fan community has kept interest in the series alive and well for 20 years, and it shows no signs of stopping now. Fans old and new have been prodding Wizards of the Coast to cast a resurrection spell on the old campaign settings. More and more people are adding their voice to the growing clamor online for the Dark Sun to come back in full force. But even if the setting never comes back, there will always be fans ready to read about it, write about it, and find ways to adapt Athas to modern RPG systems. On Jack Vance's dying Earth, what really is the point to questing and heroism when everything is already over? If everything you were trying to achieve would be washed away in the final heat death of the planet? When I began writing this review, I was worried that people just wouldn't be interested in the Dark Sun setting no matter how much I tried to sell them on it. I'm still worried that the world had its heyday more than 20 years ago, and there's no hope of getting it back to its former glory. But that's a huge part of what an adventure on Athas is all about, finding a way to persevere against everyone telling you to stop, that it's all over, done with, go home and forget about it. But you don't forget about it, you keep trying. In the Dark Sun, you learn to keep fighting even if there's no hope left, because that's how you find a spark inside everything to reignite a dead culture, a forgotten dream, or a lost world.
Though eternity lies before thee, thy work in the land of the living is not done. Return, brave ones.
And watch more videos.